Chapter 51. Bragelonne continues his inquiries. The captain, sitting buried in his leathern armchair, his spurs fixed in the floor, his sword between his legs, was reading a number of letters as he twisted his mustache. D'Artagnan uttered a welcome full of pleasure when he perceived his friend's son. "Raoul, my boy," he said, "by what lucky accident does it happen that the king has recalled you?" These words did not sound agreeably in the young man's ears, who, as he seated himself, replied, "Upon my word, I cannot tell you. All that I know is, I have come back." "Hum," said D'Artagnan, folding up his letters and directing a look full of meaning at him. "What do you say, my boy? That the king has not recalled you, and you have returned? I do not understand that at all." Raoul was already pale enough, and he now began to turn his hat round and round in his hand. "What the deuce is the matter that you look as you do, and what makes you so dumb?" said the captain. "Do people nowadays assume that sort of airs in England? I have been in England, and came here again as lively as a chaffinch. Will you not say something? I have too much to say. How is your father?" "Forgive me, my dear friend. I was going to ask you that." D'Artagnan increased the sharpness of his penetrating gaze, which no secret was capable of resisting. "You are unhappy about something," he said. "I am, indeed, and you know the reason very well, Monsieur d'Artagnan." "I? Of course. Nay, do not pretend to be astonished." "I am not pretending to be astonished, my friend. Dear captain, I know very well that in all trials of finesse, as well as in all trials of strength, I shall be beaten by you. You can see that at the present moment I am an idiot, an absolute noodle. I have neither head nor arm. Do not despise, but help me. In 2 words, I am the most wretched of living beings." Oh, why that?" inquired D'Artagnan, unbuckling his belt and thawing the asperity of his smile. "Because Mademoiselle de la Vallière is deceiving me." "She is deceiving you?" said D'Artagnan, not a muscle whose face had moved. "Those are big words. Who makes use of them?" "Everyone." If everyone says so, there must be some truth in it. I begin to believe there is fire when I see smoke. It is ridiculous, perhaps, but it is so." "Therefore you do believe me?" exclaimed Bragelonne, quickly. "I never mix myself up in affairs of that kind. You know that very well." "What? Not for a friend, for a son." "Exactly. If you were a stranger, I should tell you. I will tell you nothing at all. How is Porthos, do you know?" "Monsieur," cried Raoul, pressing D'Artagnan's hand, "I entreat you in the name of the friendship you vowed my father." "The deuce take it, you are really ill from curiosity." "No, it is not from curiosity. It is from love." "Good. Another big word. If you were really in love, my dear Raoul, you would be very different." "What do you mean?" "I mean that if you were really so deeply in love that I could believe I was addressing myself to your heart, but it is impossible. I tell you I love Louise to distraction." D'Artagnan could read to the very bottom of the young man's heart. "Impossible, I tell you," he said. "You are like all young men. You are not in love. You are out of your senses." "Well, suppose it were only that. No sensible man ever succeeded in making much of a brain when the head was turned. I have completely lost my senses in the same way 100 times in my life. You would listen to me, but you would not hear me. You would hear, but you would not understand me. You would understand, but you would not obey me. Oh, try. I go far. Even if I were unfortunate enough to know something and foolish enough to communicate it to you, you are my friend, you say?" "Indeed, yes." "Very good. I should quarrel with you. You would never forgive me for having destroyed your illusion, as people say in love affairs. Monsieur d'Artagnan, you know all, and yet you plunge me in perplexity and despair, in death itself. There now. I never complain, as you know, but as heaven and my father would never forgive me for blowing out my brains, I will go and get the first person I meet to give me the information which you withhold. I will tell him he lies, and you would kill him. And a fine affair that would be. So much the better. What should I care? Kill anyone you please, my boy, if it gives you any pleasure. It is exactly like a man with a toothache who keeps on saying, "Oh, what torture I am suffering. I could bite a piece of iron in half." My answer always is, "Bite, my friend, bite. The tooth will remain all the same." "I shall not kill any one, monsieur," said Raoul gloomily. "Yes, yes. You now assume a different tone. Instead of killing, you'll get killed yourself, I suppose you mean? Very fine, indeed. How much I should regret you. Of course I should go about all day, saying, 'Ah, what a fine, stupid fellow that Bragelonne was. As great a stupid as I ever met with. I have passed my whole life almost in teaching him how to hold and use his sword properly. And the silly fellow has got himself spitted like a lark. Go, then, Raoul, go and get yourself disposed of if you like. I hardly know who can have taught you logic, but deuce take me if your father has not been regularly robbed of his money." Raoul buried his face in his hands, murmuring, "No, no, I have not a single friend in the world." "Oh, bah!" said D'Artagnan. "I meet with nothing but raillery or indifference. Idle fancies, monsieur. I do not laugh at you, although I am a Gascon. And as for being indifferent, if I were so, I should have sent you about your business a quarter of an hour ago, for you would make a man who is out of his senses with delight as dull as possible, and would be the death of one who is out of spirits. How now, young man? Do you wish me to disgust you with the girl you are attached to, and to teach you to execrate the whole sex who constitute the honor and happiness of human life? Oh, tell me, monsieur, and I will bless you. Do you think, my dear fellow, that I can have crammed into my brain all about the carpenter and the painter and the staircase, and 100 other similar tales of the same kind? A carpenter? What do you mean? Upon my word, I don't know. Someone told me there was a carpenter who made an opening through a certain flooring. In La Valliere's room. Oh, I don't know where. In the king's apartment, perhaps? Of course. If it were in the king's apartment, I should tell you, I suppose. In whose room, then? I have told you for the last hour that I know nothing of the whole affair. But the painter, then? The portrait. It seems that the king wished to have the portrait of one of the ladies belonging to the court. La Vallière? Why, you seem to have only that name in your mouth. Who spoke to you of La Vallière? If it be not her portrait, then why do you suppose it would concern me? I do not suppose it will concern you, but you ask me all sorts of questions, and I answer you. You positively will learn all the scandal of the affair, and I tell you, make the best you can of it. Raoul struck his forehead with his hand in utter despair. "It will kill me," he said. "Yes, you are right." And he made a step or two, as if he were going to leave. "Where are you going?" "To look for someone who will tell me the truth." "Who is that?" "A woman. Mademoiselle de la Vallière herself. I suppose you mean?" said D'Artagnan with a smile. "Ah, a famous idea that. You wish to be consoled by someone, and you will be so at once. She will tell you nothing ill of herself, of course. So be off." "You are mistaken, monsieur," replied Raoul. "The woman I mean will tell me all the evil she possibly can." "You have some reasons for wishing me not to talk with Montali's? Well, I admit it. And, in point of fact, why should I play with you as a cat does with a poor mouse? You distress me, you do, indeed. And if I wish you not to speak to Montali's just now, it is because you will be betraying your secret, and people will take advantage of it. Wait, if you can." "I cannot." "So much the worse." "Why, you see, Raoul, if I had an idea, but I have not got one. Promise me that you will pity me, my friend. That is all I need, and leave me to get out of the affair by myself." "Oh, yes, indeed, in order that you may get deeper into the mire. A capital idea, truly. Go and sit down at that table, and take a pen in your hand." "What for?" "To write, and ask Montali's to give you an interview." "Ah!" said Raoul, snatching eagerly at the pen which the captain held out to him. Suddenly the door opened, and one of the Musketeers, approaching D'Artagnan, said, "Captain, Mademoiselle de Montali's is here, and wishes to speak to you." "To me?" murmured D'Artagnan. "Ask her to come in. I shall soon see," he said to himself, "whether she wishes to speak to me or not." The cunning captain was quite right in his suspicions, for as soon as Montali's entered, she exclaimed, "Oh, monsieur!" "Monsieur, I beg your pardon, Monsieur d'Artagnan. Oh, I forgive you, mademoiselle, said D'Artagnan. I know that at my age, those who are looking for me generally need me for something or another. I was looking for M. de Bragelonne, replied Montalais. How very fortunate that is. He was looking for you, too. Raoul, will you accompany Mademoiselle de Montalais? Oh, certainly. Go along, then, he said, as he gently pushed Raoul out of the cabinet. And then, taking hold of Montalais's hand, he said in a low voice, Be kind towards him. Spare him, and spare her, too, if you can. Ah, she said in the same tone of voice. It is not I who must speak to him. Who, then? It is Madame who has sent for him. Very good, cried D'Artagnan. It is Madame, is it? In an hour's time, then the poor fellow will be cured. Or else dead, said Montalais, in a voice full of compassion. Adieu, Monsieur d'Artagnan, she said, and she ran to join Raoul, who was waiting for her at a little distance from the door, very much puzzled and thoroughly uneasy at the dialogue, which promised no good augury for him. Chapter 52. Two Jealousies. Lovers are tender towards everything that forms part of the daily life of the object of their affection. Raoul no sooner found himself alone with Montalais than he kissed her hand with rapture. There, said the young girl, sadly. You are throwing your kisses away. I will guarantee that they will not bring you back any interest. What? At all events, interrupted Raoul. Raoul clenched his hands and tried to assume the look and gait of a man of courage. It is true, but a man of courage on his way to the torture chamber. Montalais, glancing in every direction, walking along with an easy, swinging gait, and holding up her head pertly in the air, preceded him to Madame's apartments, where he was at once introduced. Well, he thought, this day will pass away without my learning anything. Guiche showed too much consideration for my feelings. He had no doubt come to an understanding with Madame, and both of them, by a friendly plot, agreed to postpone the solution of the problem. Why have I not a determined, inveterate enemy? That serpent de Wardes, for instance, that he would bite is very likely, but I should not hesitate any more. To hesitate, to doubt, better far to die. The next moment Raoul was in Madame's presence. Henrietta, more charming than ever, was half lying, half reclining in her armchair, her small feet upon an embroidered velvet cushion. She was playing a kitten with long silky fur, which was biting her fingers and hanging by the lace of her collar. Madame seemed plunged in deep thought, so deep, indeed, that it required both Montalais and Raoul's voice to disturb her from her reverie. Madame shook her head as if she were just awakening, and then said, Good morning, Monsieur de Bragelonne. Yes, I sent for you. So you have returned from England? Yes, madam, and am at your Royal Highness's commands. Thank you. Leave us, Montalais. And the latter immediately left the room. You have a few minutes to give me, Monsieur de Bragelonne, have you not? My life is at your Royal Highness's disposal, Raoul returned with respect, guessing that there was something serious in these unusual courtesies, nor was he displeased, indeed, to observe the seriousness of her manner, feeling persuaded that there was some sort of affinity between Madame's sentiments and his own. In fact, every one at court, of any perception at all, knew perfectly well the capricious fancy and absurd despotism of the princess's singular character. Madame had been flattered beyond all bounds by the king's attention. She had made herself talked about. She had inspired the queen with that mortal jealousy, which is a stinging scorpion at the heel of every woman's happiness. Madame, in a word, in her attempts to cure a wounded pride, found that her heart had become deeply and passionately attached. We know what Madame had done to recall Raoul, who had been sent out away by Louis XIV. Raoul did not know of her letter to Charles II, although D'Artagnan had guessed its contents. Who will undertake to account for that seemingly inexplicable mixture of love and vanity, that passionate tenderness of feeling, that prodigious duplicity of conduct? Bragelonne looked at Madame Henrietta, and seeing how pale she was, not alone for what she was keeping back, but also from what she was burning to say, said, Satisfied? What is there for me to be satisfied or dissatisfied about, madam? But what are those things of which a man of your age and of your appearance is usually either satisfied or dissatisfied. How eager she is, thought Raoul, almost terrified. What venom is it she is going to distill into my heart? And then, frightened at what she might possibly be going to tell him, and wishing to put off the opportunity of having everything explained, which he had hitherto so ardently wished for, yet had dreaded so much, he replied, "I left, madam, a dear friend in good health, and on my return I find him very ill." "You refer to Emdegche," replied Madame Henrietta, with imperturbable self-possession. "I have heard he is a very dear friend of yours." "He is, indeed, madam." "Well, it is quite true he has been wounded, but he is better now." "Oh, de Guiche is not to be pitied," she said hurriedly, and then, recovering herself, added, "But has he anything to complain of? Has he complained of anything? Is there any cause of grief or sorrow that we are not acquainted with? So much the better, then, for in other respects, de Guiche seems to be very happy. He is always in very high spirits. I am sure that you, Monsieur de Bragelonne, would far prefer be, like him, wounded only in the body, for what, indeed, is such a wound after all." Raoul started. "Alas!" he said to himself, "she is returning to it." "I did not say anything, madam." "You did not say anything. You disapprove of my observation, then? You are perfectly satisfied, I suppose?" "That which your Royal Highness wishes me to understand," said Raoul, trembling, notwithstanding his command over himself, as he pronounced these words. "In point of fact," murmured the princess, "it seems cruel, but since I begun—" "Yes, madam, once your Highness has deigned to begin, will you condescend to finish?" Henrietta rose hurriedly and walked a few paces up and down her room. "What did Guiche tell you?" she said suddenly. "Nothing, madam." "Nothing? Did he say nothing? Ah, how well I recognize him in that. No doubt he wished to spare me." "No more than de Guiche, madam." "I know nothing at all, madam." "Not the scene in the storm?" "No, madam." "No, madam." "Nor the flight to Chalet?" Raoul, whose head dropped like a blossom cut down by the reaper, made an almost superhuman effort to smile, as he replied with the greatest gentleness, "I have had the honor of telling your Royal Highness that I am absolutely ignorant of everything, that I am a poor unremembered outcast, who has this moment arrived from England. There have rolled so many stormy waves between myself and those I left behind me here, that the rumor of none of the circumstances your Highness refers to has been able to reach me." Henrietta was affected by his extreme pallor, his gentleness, and his great courage. The principal feeling in her heart at that moment was an eager desire to hear the nature of the remembrance which the poor lover retained of the woman who had made him suffer so much. "Monsieur de Bragelonne," she said, "that which your friends have refused to do, I will do for you, whom I like and esteem very much. I will be your friend on this occasion. You hold your head high, as a man of honor should, and I deeply regret that you may have to bow before ridicule, and in a few days it might be contempt." "Ah!" exclaimed Raoul, perfectly livid. "It is as bad as that, then?" "If you do not know," said the princess, "I see that you guess. You are affianced, I believe, to Mademoiselle de la Vallière?" "Yes, madam." "By that right, you deserve to be warned about her, as some day or another I shall be obliged to dismiss Mademoiselle de la Vallière from my service." "Dismiss la Vallière!" cried Bragelonne. "Of course. Do you suppose I shall always be amenable to the tears and protestations of the king? No, no. My house shall no longer be made a convenience for such practices. But you tremble, you cannot stand." "No, madam, no," said Bragelonne, making an effort over himself. "I thought I should have died just now, that was all. Your Royal Highness did me the honor to say that the king wept and implored you." "Yes, but in vain," returned the princess, who then related to Raoul the scene that took place at Chalet, and the king's despair on his return. She told him of his indulgence to herself, and the terrible word with which the outraged princess, the humiliated coquette, had quashed the royal anger. Raoul stood with his head bent down. "What do you think of it all?" she said. "The king loves her, he replied. Alas, madam, I was thinking of the time when she loved me. Henrietta was for a moment struck with admiration at the sublime disbelief. And then, shrugging her shoulders, she said, "You do not believe me, I see. How deeply you must love her. And you doubt if she loves a king? I do, until I have a proof of it. Forgive me, madam, but she has given me her word, and her mind and heart are too upright to tell a falsehood. You require a proof. Be it so. Come with me, then." Chapter 53. A domiciliary visit. The princess, preceding Raoul, led him to the courtyard towards that part of the building La Vallière inhabited, and, ascending the same staircase which Raoul himself had ascended that very morning, she paused at the door of the room in which the young man had been so strangely received by Montalais. The opportunity was remarkably well chosen to carry out the project Madame Henrietta had conceived, for the chateau was empty. The king, the courtiers, and the ladies of the court had set off for Saint-Germain. Madame Henrietta was the only one who knew of Bragelonne's return, and thinking over the advantages which might be drawn from this return, she had feigned indisposition in order to remain behind. Madame was therefore confident of finding La Valliere's room and Saint-Aignan's apartment perfectly empty. She took a pass-key from her pocket and opened the door of her maid of honor's apartment. Bragelonne's gaze was immediately fixed upon the interior of the room, which he recognized at once. An impression which the sight had produced upon him was torture. The princess looked at him, and her practiced eye at once detected what was passing in the young man's heart. "You ask for proofs," she said. "Do not be astonished, then, if I give you them. But if you do not think you have courage enough to confront them, there is still time to withdraw." "I thank you, madam," said Bragelonne, "but I came here to be convinced." "You promised to convince me. Do so." Bragelonne obeyed, and then turned toward the princess, whom he interrogated by a look. "You know where you are, I suppose?" inquired Madame Henrietta. "Everything leads me to believe I am in Mademoiselle de la Valliere's room. But I would observe to your highness that this room is a room and is not a proof." "A trapdoor," said Raoul, astonished, for D'Artagnan's word began to return to his memory, and he had an indistinct recollection that D'Artagnan had made use of the same word. He looked, but uselessly, for some cleft or crevice which might indicate an opening or a ring to assist in lifting up the planking. "Ah, I forgot," said Madame Henrietta. "I forgot the secret spring. The fourth plank of the flooring. Press on the spot where you will observe a knot in the wood. Those are the instructions. Press, Vicomte. Press, I say yourself." Raoul, pale as death, pressed his finger on the spot which had been indicated to him. At the same moment the spring began to work, and the trap rose of its own accord. "It is ingenious enough, certainly," said the princess, "and one can see that the architect foresaw that a woman's hand only would have to make use of this spring, for see how easy the trapdoor opened without assistance." "A staircase!" cried Raoul. "But before following you, madam, may I ask where this staircase leads to?" "Ah, true, I forgot to tell you. You know, perhaps, that formerly M. de Saint-Aignan lived in the very next apartment to the king?" "Yes, madam, I am aware of that. That was the arrangement, at least, before I left, and more than once I had the honor of visiting his rooms." "Very good, madam," returned Raoul. "But go on, I beg, for I do not understand yet." "Well, then it accidentally happened," continued the princess, "that de Saint-Aignan's apartment is situated underneath the apartments of my maids of honor, and by a further coincidence, exactly underneath the room of La Vallière. But what was the motive of this trapdoor in the staircase? That I cannot tell you. Would you like to go down to Monsieur de Saint-Aignan's rooms? Perhaps we shall be able to find the solution of the enigma there." And Madame set the example by going down herself, while Raoul, sighing deeply, followed her. At every step Bragelonne took, he advanced further into that mysterious apartment which had witnessed La Valliere's sighs and still retained the perfume of her presence. Bragelonne fancied he perceived, as he inhaled the atmosphere, that the young girl must have passed through, then succeeded to these emanations of herself, which he regarded as invisible though certain proofs, flowers she preferred to all others, books of her own selection. If Raoul retained a single doubt on the subject, It would have vanished at the secret harmony of taste and connection of the mind with the ordinary objects of life. The happiness of the woman who loves, when that happiness is derived from a rival, is a living torture for a jealous man. But for a jealous man such as Raoul was, for one whose heart for the first time in its existence was being steeped in gall and bitterness, Louise's happiness was in reality an ignominious death, a death of body and soul. He guessed all. He fancied he could see them, with their hands clasped in each other's, their faces drawn close together and reflected, side by side, in loving proximity, and they gazed upon the mirrors around them. So sweet an occupation for lovers, who, as they thus see themselves twice over, imprint the picture still more deeply on their memories. He could guess, too, the stolen kiss snatched as they separated from each other's love society, the luxury, the studied elegance, eloquent of perfection, of indolence, of ease, the extreme care shown, either to spare the loved object every annoyance or to occasion her a delightful surprise, that might and majesty of love multiplied by the majesty and might of royalty itself, seemed like a death blow to Raoul. If there be anything which can in any way assuage or mitigate the tortures of jealousy, it is the inferiority of the man who is preferred to yourself. Whilst, on the very contrary, if there be one anguish more bitter than another, a misery for which language lacks a word, it is the superiority of the man preferred to yourself, superior, perhaps, in youth, beauty, grace. It is in such moments as these that heaven almost seems to have taken part against a disdained and rejected lover. One final pang was reserved for poor Raoul. Madame Henrietta lifted up a silk curtain, and behind the canvas he perceived La Valliere's portrait. Not only the portrait of La Vallière, but a La Vallière radiant with youth, beauty, and happiness, inhaling life and enjoyment at every pore, because at 18 years of age love itself is life. "Louise," murmured Bragelonne. "Louise, is it true, then? Oh, you have never loved me, for never have you looked at me in that manner." And he felt as if his heart were crushed within his bosom. Madame Henrietta looked at him, almost envious of his extreme grief, although she well knew there was nothing to envy in it, and that she herself was as passionately loved by de Guiche as Louise by Bragelonne. Raoul interpreted Madame Henrietta's look. "Oh, forgive me, madame. In your presence I know I ought to have greater self-control. But heaven grant that you may never be struck by similar misery to that which crushes me at this moment. For you are but a woman, and would not be able to endure so terrible an affliction. Forgive me, I again entreat you, madam. I am but a man without rank or position, while you belong to a race whose happiness knows no bounds, whose power acknowledges no limit." "Monsieur de Bragelonne," replied Henrietta, "a mind such as yours merits all the consideration and respect which a queen's heart even can bestow. Regard me as your friend, monsieur, and as such, indeed, I would not allow your whole life to be poisoned by perfidy and covered with ridicule. It was I, indeed, who, with more courage than any of your pretended friends, I except Iniche, was the cause of your return from London. It is I, also, who now give you the melancholy proofs necessary, however, for your cure if you are a lover with courage in his heart, and not a weeping Amatus. Do not thank me, pity me, even, and do not serve the king less faithfully than you have done." Raoul smiled bitterly. "Ah, true. I was forgetting that the king is my master. Your liberty, nay, your very life, is in danger." A steady, penetrating look informed Madame Henrietta that she was mistaken, and that her last argument was not a likely one to affect the young man. "Take care, Monsieur de Bragelonne," she said, "for if you do not weigh well all your actions, you might throw into an extravagance of wrath a prince whose passions, once aroused, exceed the bounds of reason, and you would thereby involve your friends and family in the deepest distress. You must bend, you must submit, and you must cure yourself." "I thank you, madam. I appreciate the advice your Royal Highness is good enough to give me, and I will endeavor to follow it. But one final word, I beg." "Name it." "Should I be indiscreet in asking you the secret of this staircase, of this trapdoor, a secret which, it seems, you have discovered?" "Nothing more simple. For the purpose of exercising surveillance over the young girls who are attached to my service, I have duplicate keys of their doors. It seemed very strange to me that M. de Saint-Aignan should change his apartments." It seemed very strange that the king should come to see him at the St. Aignan every day. And finally, it seemed very strange that so many things should be done during your absence, that the very habits and customs of the court appeared changed. I do not wish to be trifled with by the king, nor to serve as a cloak for his love affairs. For after La Vallière, who weeps incessantly, he will take a fancy to Mondelise, who is always laughing, and then to Tonnet-Charente, who does nothing but sing all day. To act such a part as that will be unworthy of me. I thrust aside the scruples which my friendship for you suggested. I discovered the secret. I have wounded your feelings, I know, and I again entreat you to pardon me. But I had a duty to fulfill. I have discharged it. You are now forewarned. The tempest will soon burst. Protect yourself accordingly. You naturally expect, however, that a result of some kind must follow, replied Bragelonne with firmness. For you do not suppose I shall silently accept the shame thus thrust upon me, or the treachery which has been practiced against me? You will take whatever steps in the matter you please, Monsieur Raoul. Only do not betray the source whence you derive the truth. That is all I have to ask. The only price I require for the service I have rendered you. Fear nothing, madam, said Bragelonne with a bitter smile. I bribed the locksmith, in whom the lovers confided. You can just as well have done so as myself, can you not? Yes, madam. Your Royal Highness, however, has no other advice or caution to give me, except that of not betraying you. None. I am about, therefore, to beg your Royal Highness to allow me to remain here for one moment. Without me? Oh, no, madam. It matters very little, for what I have to do can be done in your presence. I only ask one moment to write a line to someone. It is dangerous, Monsieur de Bragelonne. Take care. No one can possibly know that your Royal Highness has done me the honor to conduct me here. Besides, I shall sign the letter I am going to write. Do as you please, then. Raoul drew out his tablet and wrote rapidly on one of the leaves the following words. Monsieur le Comte, do not be surprised to find this paper signed by me. The friend I shall very shortly send a call on you will have the honor to explain the object of my visit. Vicomte Raoul de Bragelonne. He rolled up the paper, slipped it into the lock of the door, which communicated with the room set apart for the two lovers, and satisfied himself that the missive was so apparent that St. Aignan could not but see it as he entered. He rejoined the princess, who had already reached the top of the staircase. They then separated, Raoul pretending to thank her highness, Henrietta pitying, or seeming to pity, with all her heart, the wretched young man she had just condemned to such fearful torture. "Oh," she said, as she saw him disappear, pale as death and his eyes bursting with blood, "if I had foreseen this, I would have hid the truth from that poor gentleman." Chapter 54. Porthos's plan of action. The great number of individuals we have introduced into this long story is the reason why each of them has been forced to appear only in turn, according to the exigencies of the recital. The result is that our readers have had no opportunity of meeting our friend Porthos since his return from Fontainebleau. The honors which he had received from the king had not changed the easy, affectionate character of that excellent-hearted man. He may, perhaps, have held up his head a little higher than usual, and a majesty of demeanor, as it were, may have betrayed itself since the honor of dining at the king's table had been accorded him. His Majesty's banqueting room had produced a certain effect on Porthos. Le Seigneur de Bragelonne de Pierrefonds delighted to remember that, during that memorable dinner, the numerous array of servants, and the large number of officials in attendance on the guests, gave a certain tone and effect to the repast, and seemed, as it were, to furnish the room. Porthos undertook to confer upon Mouston a position of some kind or other, in order to establish a sort of hierarchy among his other domestics, and create a military household, which was not unusual among the great captains of the age, since, in the preceding century, this luxury had been greatly encouraged by Messrs. de Treville, de Schomberg, de La Vieuville, without alluding to under Richelieu, M., de Condé, and de Bienturin. And therefore, why should not he, Porthos, the friend of the king, and of M., Fouquet, a baron, an engineer, etc., why should not he, indeed, enjoy all the delightful privileges which large possessions and unusual merit invariably confer? Somewhat neglected by Aramis, who, we know, was greatly occupied with M. Fouquet, neglected also, on account of his being on duty, by D'Artagnan, tired of Truchen and Planchet, Porthos was surprised to find himself dreaming, without precisely knowing why. But if anyone had said to him, "Do you want anything, Porthos?" he would most certainly have replied, "Yes." After one of those dinners, during which Porthos attempted to recall to his recollection all the details of the royal banquet, gently joyful, thanks to the excellence of the wines, gently melancholy, thanks to his ambitious ideas, Porthos was gradually falling off into a placid doze when his servant entered to announce that M. de Bragelonne wished to speak to him. Porthos passed into an adjoining room, where he found his young friend in the disposition of mind we are already aware of. Raoul advanced towards Porthos and shook him by the hand. Porthos, surprised at his seriousness of aspect, offered him a seat. "Dear M. du Vallon," said Raoul, "I have a service to ask of you." "Nothing could happen more fortunately, my young friend," replied Porthos. "I have 8,000 livres sent me this morning from Pierrefonds, and if you want any money—" "No, I thank you, it is not money." "So much the worse, then. I have always heard it said that that is the rarest service, but the easiest to render. The remark struck me. I like to cite remarks that strike me. Your heart is as good as your mind is sound and true. You are much too kind, I declare. You will dine here, of course." "No, I am not hungry." Not dine? What a dreadful country England is." "Not too much so, indeed, but, well, if such excellent fish and meat were not to be procured there, it would hardly be endurable. Yes, I am listening. Only just allow me to take a little sip. One gets thirsty in Paris." And he ordered a bottle of champagne to be brought, and, having first filled Raoul's glass, he filled his own, drank it down at a gulp, and then resumed, "I needed that, in order to listen to you with proper attention. I am now entirely at your service. What do you wish to ask me, dear Raoul? What do you want? Give me your opinion on quarrels in general, my dear friend." "My opinion? Well, but explain your idea a little more coherently," replied Porthos, rubbing his forehead. "I mean, you are generally good-humored, good-tempered, whenever any misunderstanding arises between a friend of yours and a stranger, for instance?" "Whenever any friend of mine gets into a quarrel, I always act on one principle." "What is that?" "That lost time is irreparable, and one never arranges an affair so well as when everything has been done to embroil the disputants as much as possible." "Ah, indeed. Is that the principle on which you proceed?" "Precisely. So, as soon as a quarrel takes place, I bring the two parties together." "Exactly. You understand that by this means it is impossible for an affair not to be arranged." "Oh, not the least in the world. Just fancy, now, I have had in my life something like 180 to 190 regular duels, without reckoning hasty encounters or chance meetings." "It is a very handsome aggregate," said Raoul, unable to resist a smile. "A mere nothing, but I am so gentle. D'Artagnan reckons his duels by hundreds." "It is very true. He is a little too hard and sharp. I have often told him so." "And so," resumed Raoul, "you generally arrange the affairs of honor your friends confide to you. But the way in which you settle them is at least honorable, I suppose?" "Oh, rely upon that. And at this stage, I will explain my other principle to you. As soon as my friend has entrusted his quarrel to me, this is what I do. I go to his adversary at once, armed with a politeness and self-possession absolutely requisite under such circumstances." "That is the way, then," said Raoul bitterly, "that you arrange affairs so safely." "I believe you." "I go to the adversary, then, and say to him, 'It is impossible, monsieur, that you are ignorant of the extent to which you have insulted my friend.'" Raoul frowned at this remark. "It sometimes happens, very often indeed," pursued Porthos, "that my friend has not been insulted at all. He has even been the first to give offense. You can imagine, therefore, whether my language is or is not well chosen." And Porthos burst into a peal of laughter. "Decidedly," said Raoul to himself, while the merry thunder of Porthos's laughter was resounding in his ears, "I am very unfortunate. De Guiche treats me with coolness, D'Artagnan with ridicule. Porthos is too tame. No one will settle this affair in the only way I wish it to be settled. And I came to Porthos because I wanted to find a sword instead of cold reasoning at my service. My ill luck dogs me. Porthos, who had recovered himself, continued, "By one simple expression, I leave my adversary without an excuse." "That is as it may happen," said Raoul absently. "Not at all. It is quite certain. I have not left him an excuse. And then it is that I display all my courtesy, in order to attain the happy issue of my project. I advance, therefore, with an air of great politeness, and taking my adversary by the hand, I say to him, 'Now that you are convinced of having given the offense, we are sure of reparation between my friend and yourself. The future can only offer an exchange of mutual courtesies of conduct, and consequently, my mission now is to acquaint you with the length of my friend's sword.'" "And so," said Raoul, pale with vexation, "you reconcile the two adversaries on the ground." "I beg your pardon," interrupted Porthos. "Reconcile? What for?" "Well, what then, if he is waiting? Well, if he is waiting, it is merely to stretch his legs a little. The adversary, on the contrary, is stiff from riding. They place themselves in proper order, and my friend kills the opponent, and the affair is ended." "Ah, he kills him, then?" cried Raoul. "Oh, my dear Baron!" exclaimed Raoul, as he embraced Porthos. "You approve of my method, then?" said the giant. "I approve of it so thoroughly, that I shall have recourse to it this very day, without a moment's delay. At once, in fact. You are the very man I have been looking for." "Good. Here I am. Then you want to fight, I suppose?" "Absolutely. It is very natural." "With whom?" "With M. de Saint-Aignan." "I know him. A most agreeable man, who was exceedingly polite to me the day I had the honor of dining with the king. I shall certainly acknowledge his politeness in return, even if it had not happened to be my usual custom. So he has given you an offense." "A mortal offense." "The deuce! I can say so, I suppose." "More than that, even if you like." "That is a very great convenience. I may look upon it as one of your arranged affairs, may I not?" said Raoul, smiling. "As a matter of course. Where will you be waiting for him?" "Ah, I forgot. It is a very delicate matter. De Saint-Aignan is a very great friend of the king's. So I have heard it said. So that if I kill him—" "Oh, you will kill him, certainly. You must take every precaution to do so. But there is no difficulty in these matters now. If you had lived in our early days— Ah, those were days worth living for. My dear friend, you do not quite understand me. I mean that M. de Saint-Aignan being a friend of the king, the affair will be more difficult to manage, since the king might learn beforehand." "Oh, no, that is not likely. You know my method. Monsieur, you'll just injure my friend, and—" "Yes, I know it. And then, monsieur, I have horses below. I carry him off before he can have spoken to anyone. Will he allow himself to be carried off like that?" "I should think so. I should like to see it fail. It would be the first time, if it did. It is true, though, that the young men of the present day— Bah! I would carry him off bodily, if that were all." And Porthos, adding gesture to speech, lifted Raoul in the chair he was sitting on off the ground, and carried him round the room. "Very good," said Raoul, laughing. "All we have to do is to state the grounds of the quarrel with M. de Saint-Aignan. Well, but that is done, it seems." "No, my dear M. du Vallon, the usage of the present day requires that the cause of quarrel should be explained." "Very good. Tell me what it is, then." "The fact is—" "Deuce take it, how troublesome all this is. In former days we had no occasion to say anything about the matter. People fought for the sake of fighting, and I, for one, know no better reason than that." "You are quite right, M. du Vallon. However, tell me what the cause is." "It is too long a story to tell. Only, as one must particularize to a certain extent, and as, on the other hand, the affair is full of difficulties and requires the most absolute secrecy, you will have the kindness merely to tell de Saint-Aignan that he has, in the first place, insulted me by changing his lodgings." "By changing his lodgings? Good," said Porthos, who began to count on his fingers. "Next?" than in getting a trapdoor made in his new apartments. I understand, said Porthos. A trapdoor. Upon my word, that is very serious. You ought to be furious at that. What the deuce does a fellow mean by getting trapdoors made without first consulting you? Trapdoors. Mordieux. I haven't got any, except in my dungeons at Bracieux. And you will please add, said Raoul, that my last motive for considering myself insulted is the existence of the portrait that M. de Saint-Aignan well knows. Is it possible? A portrait, too. A change of residence, a trapdoor, and a portrait. Why, my dear friend, well, but one of these causes a complaint there's enough, and more than enough, for all the gentlemen in France and Spain to cut each other's throats, and that is saying but very little. Well, my dear friend, you are furnished with all you need, I suppose? I shall take a second horse with me. Select your own rendezvous, and while you are waiting there, you can practice some of the best passes, so as to get your limbs as elastic as possible. Thank you. I shall be waiting for you in the wood of Vincennes, close to Minims. All goes well. Then, where am I to find this M. de Saint-Aignan? At the Palais Royal. Porthos rang a huge handbell. My court suit, he said to the servant who answered the summons. My horse, and a led horse to accompany me. Then, turning to Raoul, as soon as the servant had quitted the room, he said, Does your father know anything about this? No, I am going to write to him. And D'Artagnan? No, nor D'Artagnan either. He is very cautious, you know, and might have diverted me from my purpose. D'Artagnan is a sound adviser, though, said Porthos, astonished that, in his own loyal faith in D'Artagnan, anyone could have thought it himself, so long as there was a D'Artagnan in the world. Dear M. du Vallon, said Raoul, do not question me any more, I implore you. I have told you all that I had to say. It is prompt action I now expect, sharp and decided as you know how to arrange it. That, indeed, is my reason for having chosen you. You will be satisfied with me, replied Porthos. To work, then, my dear friend. Rely upon me, said the giant, finishing the bottle, while a servant spread out upon a sofa the gorgeously decorated dress trimmed with lace. Raoul left the room, saying to himself, with a secret delight, Perfidious king, traitorous monarch, I cannot reach thee. I do not wish it, for kings are sacred objects. But your friend, your accomplice, your panderer, the coward who represents you, shall pay for your crime. I will kill him in thy name, and afterwards we will bethink ourselves of Louise. Chapter 55. The change of residence, the trapdoor, and the portrait. Porthos, entrusted to his great delight with this mission, which made him feel young again, took half an hour less than his usual time to put on his court suit, to show that he was a man acquainted with the usages of high society. He had begun by sending his lackey to inquire if Monsieur de Saint-Aignan were at home, and heard, in answer, that Vicomte de Saint-Aignan had had the honor of accompanying the king to Saint-Germain, as well as the whole court, but that Monsieur Vicomte had just that moment returned. Immediately upon this reply, Porthos made as much haste as possible, and reached Saint-Aignan's apartments just as the latter was having his boots taken off. The promenade had been delightful. The king, who was in love more than ever, and of course happier than ever, behaved in the most charming manner to everyone. Nothing could possibly equal his kindness. M. de Saint-Aignan, it may be remembered, was a poet, and fancied that he had proved that he was so under too many a memorable circumstance to allow the title to be disputed by any one. An indefatigable rhymester he had, during the whole of the journey, overwhelmed with quatrains, sextains, and madrigals, first the king and then La Vallière. The king, on his side, was in a similarly poetical mood, and had made a distich, while La Vallière, delighting in poetry, as most women do who are in love, had composed 2 sonnets. The day, then, had not been a bad one for Apollo, and so, as soon as he had returned to Paris, Saint-Aignan, who knew beforehand that his verse would be sure to be extensively circulated in court circles, occupied himself, with a little more attention than he had been able to bestow during the promenade, with the composition, as well as with the idea itself. Consequently, with all the tenderness of a father about to start his children in life, He candidly interrogated himself whether the public would find these offsprings of his imagination sufficiently elegant and graceful, and in order to make his mind easy on the subject, M. de Saint-Aignan recited to himself the madrigal he had composed and which he had repeated from memory to the king, and had promised to write out for him on his return. All the time he was committing these words to memory, the Comte was engaged in undressing himself more completely. He had just taken off his coat and was putting on his dressing gown, when he was informed that Monsieur Baron du Val and de Brachus de Paraffins was waiting to be received. He said, "What does that bunch of names mean? I don't know anything about him." "It is the same gentleman," replied the lackey, "who had the honor of dining with you, Monseigneur, at the king's table, when his majesty was staying at Fontainebleau." "Introduce him, then, at once," cried Saint-Aignan. Porthos, in a few minutes, entered the room. M. de Saint-Aignan had an excellent recollection of persons, and at the first glance he recognized a gentleman from the country who enjoyed so singular a reputation, and whom the king had received so favorably at Fontainebleau, in spite of the smiles of some of those who were present. He therefore advanced towards Porthos with all the outward signs of consideration and manner which Porthos thought but natural, considering that he himself, whenever he called upon an adversary, hoisted a standard of the most refined politeness. Saint-Aignan desired the servant to give Porthos a chair, and the latter, who saw nothing unusual in this act of politeness, sat down gravely and coughed. The ordinary courtesies having been exchanged between the two gentlemen, the Comte, to whom the visit was paid, said, "May I ask, Monsieur le Baron, to what happy circumstance I am indebted for the favor of a visit from you?" "The very thing I am about to have the honor of explaining to you, Monsieur le Comte. But I beg your pardon. What is the matter, monsieur?" inquired Saint-Aignan. "I regret to say that I have broken your chair." "Not at all, monsieur," said Saint-Aignan. "Not at all. It is the fact, though, Monsieur le Comte. I have broken it. So much so, indeed, that if I do not move, I shall fall down, which will be an exceedingly disagreeable position for me in the discharge of the very serious mission which has been entrusted to me with regard to yourself." Porthos rose, and but just in time, for the chair had given way several inches. Saint-Aignan looked about him for something more solid for his guest to sit upon. "Modern articles of furniture," said Porthos, while the Comte was looking about, "are constructed in a ridiculously flimsy manner. In my early days, when I used to sit down with far more energy than is now the case, I do not remember ever to have broken a chair, except in taverns, with my arms." Saint-Aignan smiled at this remark. "But," said Porthos, as he settled himself down on a couch, which creaked, but did not give way beneath his weight, "that unfortunately has nothing whatever to do with my present visit." "Why unfortunately? Are you the bearer of a message of ill omen, Monsieur le Baron?" "M. Raoul de Bragelonne." "I have insulted M. Raoul de Bragelonne," cried Saint-Aignan. "I really assure you, monsieur, that it is quite impossible, for M. de Bragelonne, whom I know but very slightly, nay, whom I know hardly at all, is in England, and, as I have not seen him for a long time past, I cannot possibly have insulted him." "M. de Bragelonne is in Paris, Monsieur le Comte," said Porthos, perfectly unmoved, "and I repeat, it is quite certain you have insulted him, since he himself told me you had. Yes, monsieur, you have seriously insulted him, mortally insulted him, I repeat. It is impossible, Monsieur le Baron, I swear quite impossible. Besides," added Porthos, "you cannot be ignorant of the circumstance, since M. de Bragelonne informed me that he had already apprised you of it by a note. I give you my word of honor, monsieur, that I have received no note whatever." "This is most extraordinary," replied Porthos. "I will convince you," said Saint-Aignan, "that I have received nothing in any way from him." And he rang the bell. "Basque," he said to the servant who entered, "how many letters or notes were sent here during my absence?" "3, Monsieur le Comte. A note from M. de Fesque, one from Madame de Laferte, and a letter from M. de Las Fuentes." "Is that all?" "Yes, Monsieur le Comte." "Speak the truth before this gentleman. The truth, you understand. I will take care you are not blamed." "There was a note also from whom?" "From Mademoiselle de—" "Out with it." de Laval. That is quite sufficient, interrupted Porthos. I believe you, Monsieur le Comte. Saint Aignan dismissed the valet and followed him to the door in order to close it after him. And when he had done so, looking straight before him, he happened to see in the keyhole of the adjoining apartment the paper which Bragelonne had slipped in there as he left. "What is this?" he said. Porthos, who was sitting with his back to the room, turned round. "Aha," he said. "A note in the keyhole," exclaimed Saint Aignan. "That is not unlikely to be the missing letter, Monsieur le Comte," said Porthos. Saint Aignan took out the paper. "A note from M. de Bragelonne," he exclaimed. "You see, monsieur, I was right. Oh, when I say a thing. Brought here by M. de Bragelonne himself," the Comte murmured, turning pale. "This is infamous. How could he possibly have come here?" And the Comte rang again. "Who has been here during my absence with the king?" "No one, monsieur. That is impossible. Someone must have been here. No one could possibly have entered, monsieur, since the keys have never left my pocket. And yet I find the letter in yonder lock. Someone must have put it there. It could not have come here of its own accord. Probably it was M. de Bragelonne himself who placed it there," said Porthos. "In that case, he must have entered here. Shall we return to our little affair?" Porthos resumed, addressing Saint Aignan after a brief pause. "I am his friend. I am the person he alludes to. For the purpose of giving me a challenge? And he complains that I have insulted him? Mortally. In what way, may I ask? For his conduct is so mysterious that at least it needs some explanation." "Monsieur," replied Porthos, "my friend cannot but be right. And as far as his conduct is concerned, if it be mysterious, as you say, you have only yourself to blame for it." Porthos pronounced these words with an amount of confidence which, for a man who was unaccustomed to his ways, must have revealed an infinity of sense. "Mystery, so be it. But what is all the mystery about?" said Saint Aignan. "In the first place, monsieur," said Porthos, "you have changed your apartments." "Yes, that is quite true," said Saint Aignan. "You admit it?" said Porthos, with an air of satisfaction. "Admit it? Of course I admit it. Why should I not admit it, do you suppose? But how can my having moved my lodgings have done M. de Bragelonne any harm? Have the goodness to tell me that, for I positively do not comprehend a word of what you are saying." "No one can possibly have a spurious quarrel with the Vicomte of Bragelonne," returned Porthos. "But, at all events, you have nothing to add on the subject of your changing your apartments, I suppose?" "Nothing. And what is the next point?" "Ah, the next! You will observe, monsieur, that the one I have already mentioned is a most serious injury, to which you have given no answer, or rather, have answered very indifferently. Is it possible, monsieur, that you have changed your lodgings? De Bragelonne feels insulted at your having done so, and you do not attempt to excuse yourself." "Well, what is that?" Porthos assumed a very solemn expression as he said, "How about the trapdoor, monsieur?" Saint Aignan turned exceedingly pale. He pushed back his chair so abruptly that Porthos, simple as he was, perceived that the blow had told. "The trapdoor," murmured Saint Aignan. "Yes, monsieur. Explain that if you can," said Porthos, shaking his head. Saint Aignan held down his head as he murmured, "I have been betrayed. Everything is known." "You see me perfectly overwhelmed," pursued Saint Aignan. "Overwhelmed to a degree that I hardly know what I am about." "That we will think about," said Porthos. "The secret will not go far, in fact." "Surely, monsieur," returned Saint Aignan, "since M. de Bragelonne has penetrated the secret, he must be aware of the danger he as well as others run the risk of incurring." "M. de Bragelonne runs no danger, monsieur, nor does he fear any either, as you, if it please heaven, will find out very soon." "This fellow is a perfect madman," thought Saint Aignan. "What, in heaven's name, does he want?" He then said aloud, "Come, monsieur, let us hush up this affair." "You forget the portrait," said Porthos, in a voice of thunder, which made the Comte's blood freeze in his veins. As the portrait in question was La Valliere's portrait, and no mistake could any longer exist on the subject, Saint Aignan's eyes were completely opened. "Ah!" he exclaimed. "Ah, monsieur, I remember now that Anne de Bragelonne was engaged to be married to her." Porthos assumed an imposing air, all the majesty of ignorance. In fact, as he said, "It matters nothing whatever to me, nor to yourself, indeed, whether or not my friend was, as you say, engaged to be married. I am even astonished that you should have made use of so indiscreet a remark. It may possibly do your cause harm, monsieur." "Monsieur," replied Saint Aignan, "you are the incarnation of intelligence, delicacy, and loyalty of feeling united. I see the whole matter now clearly enough." "So much the better," said Porthos. "And," pursued Saint Aignan, "you have made me comprehend it in the most ingenious and the most delicate manner possible. I beg you to accept my best thanks." Porthos drew himself up, unable to resist the flattery of the remark. "Only, now that I know everything, permit me to explain." Porthos shook his head, as a man who does not wish to hear, but Saint Aignan continued, "I am in despair, I assure you, at all that has happened, but how would you have acted in my place? Come, between ourselves, tell me what you would have done." Porthos drew himself up as he answered, "There is now no question at all of what I should have done. Young man, you have been made acquainted with the 3 causes of complaint against you, I believe? As for the first, my change of rooms, and I now address myself to you as a man of honor and of great intelligence. Could I, when a desire of so august a personage was so urgently expressed that I should move, ought I to have disobeyed?" Porthos was about to speak, but Saint Aignan did not give him time to answer. "Ah, my frankness, I see, convinces you," he said, interpreting the movement according to his own fancy. "You feel that I am right." Porthos did not reply, and so Saint Aignan continued, "I passed by that unfortunate trapdoor," he said, placing his hand on Porthos's arm. "That trapdoor, the occasion and means of so much unhappiness, and which was constructed for you know what. Well then, in plain truth, do you suppose it was I who of my own accord in such a place too had that trapdoor made? Oh, no! You do not believe it. And here again you feel, you guess, you understand the influence of it was superior to my own. You can conceive the infatuation, the blind, irresistible passion which has been at work. But, thank heaven, I am fortunate in speaking to a man who has so much sensitiveness of feeling. And if it were not so, indeed, what amount of misery and scandal would fall upon her. Poor girl. And upon him, whom I will not name." Porthos, confused and bewildered by the eloquence and gestures of Saint Aignan, made 1,000 efforts to stem this torrent of words, of which, by the by, he did not understand a single one. He remained upright and motionless on his seat, and that was all he could do. Saint Aignan continued, and gave a new inflection to his voice and an increasing vehemence to his gesture. "As for the portrait, for I readily believe the portrait is the principal cause of complaint, tell me candidly if you think me blame. Who was it who wished to have her portrait? Was it I, who was in love with her? Is it I, who wishes to gain her affection? Again, is it I, who took her likeness? Do you think? No, 1,000 times no. I know am de Bragelonne must be in a state of despair. I know these misfortunes are most cruel. But I, too, am suffering as well, and yet there is no possibility of offering any resistance. Suppose we were to fight, we would be laughed at. If he obstinately persists in his course, he is lost. You will tell me, I know, that despair is ridiculous, but then you are a sensible man. You have understood me. I perceive by your serious, thoughtful, embarrassed air, even that the importance of the situation we are placed in has not escaped you. Return, therefore, to M. de Bragelonne. Thank him, as I have indeed reason to thank him, for having chosen as an intermediary a man of your high merit. Believe me that I shall, on my side, preserve an eternal gratitude for the man who has so ingeniously, so cleverly arranged a misunderstanding between us. And since ill luck would have it that the secret should be known to 4 instead of 3, why, this secret, which might make the most ambitious man's fortune, I am delighted to share with you, monsieur. From the bottom of my heart, I am delighted at it. From this very moment you can make use of me as you please. I place myself entirely at your mercy. What can I possibly do for you? What can I solicit, nay, require even. You have only to speak, monsieur, only to speak. And, according to the familiarly friendly fashion of that period, Saint Aignan threw his arms round Porthos and clasped him tenderly in his embrace. Porthos allowed him to do this with the most perfect indifference. Speak, resumed Saint Aignan. What do you require? Monsieur, said Porthos, I have a horse below. Be good enough to mount him. He is a very good one and will play you no tricks. Mount on horseback. What for? Inquired Saint Aignan, with no little curiosity. To accompany me to where M. de Bragelonne is waiting us. Ah, he wishes to speak to me, I suppose? I can well believe that. He wishes to have the details, very likely. Alas, it is a very delicate matter, but at the present moment I cannot, for the king is waiting for me. The king must wait, then, said Porthos. What do you say? The king must wait, interrupted the Finnish courtier, with a smile of utter amazement, for he could not understand that the king could under any circumstances be supposed to have to wait. It is merely the affair of a very short hour, returned Porthos. But where is M. de Bragelonne waiting for me? At the Minims at Vincennes. I don't think it likely, said Porthos, as his face assumed a look of utter hardness. But the Minims is a rendezvous where duels take place, and what can I have to do with the Minims? Porthos slowly drew his sword and said, That is the length of my friend's sword. Why, the man is mad, cried Saint Aignan. The color mounted to Porthos's face, as he replied, If I had not the honor of being in your own apartment, monsieur, and of representing M. de Bragelonne's interests, I would throw you out of the window. It will be merely a pleasure postponed, and you will lose nothing by waiting. Will you come with me to the Minims, monsieur, of your own free will? But take care. I will carry you if you do not come quickly. Bast! Cried Saint Aignan. As soon as Bast appeared, he said, The king wishes to see Monsieur le Comte. That is very different, said Porthos. The king's service before anything else. We will wait until this evening, monsieur. Chapter 56. Rivals in Politics. On his return from the promenade, which had been so prolific in poetical effusions, and in which every one had paid his or her tribute to muses, as the poets of the period used to say, the king found M. Fouquet waiting for an audience. M. Colbert had lain in wait for his majesty in the corridor, and followed him like a jealous and watchful shadow. M. Colbert, with his square head, his vulgar and untidy, though rich costume, somewhat resembled a Flemish gentleman after he had been overindulging in his national drink, beer. Fouquet, at sight of his enemy, remained perfectly unmoved, and during the whole of the scene which followed scrupulously resolved to observe a line of conduct particularly difficult to a man of superior mind, who does not even wish to show his contempt, for fear of doing his adversary too much honor. Colbert made no attempt to conceal his insolent expression of the vulgar joy he felt. In his opinion, M. Fouquet's was a game very badly played and hopelessly lost, although not yet finished. Colbert belonged to that school of politicians who think cleverness alone worthy of their admiration, and success the only thing worth caring for. Colbert, moreover, who was not simply an envious and jealous man, but who had the king's interests really at heart, because he was thoroughly imbued with the highest sense of probity in all matters of figures and accounts, could well afford to assign as a pretext for his conduct that in hating and doing his utmost to ruin M. Fouquet, he had nothing in view but the welfare of the state and the dignity of the crown. Most gratified, indeed, Monsieur le Surintendant, most gratified. You were very wrong not to come with us, as I invited you to do. I was working, sire, replied the superintendent, who did not even seem to take the trouble to turn aside his head in merest respect of Colbert's presence. I should hope that your majesty is not yet weary of the throne, said Fouquet. No, but thrones of soft turf are very pleasant. Your majesty gratifies my utmost wishes in speaking in that manner, for I have a request to submit to you. On whose behalf, monsieur? On behalf of the nymphs of Vaux, sire. Said Louis XIV. Your majesty, too, once deigned to make me a promise, said Fouquet. Yes, I remember it. Fouquet, with the profoundest contempt, did not take the slightest notice of the remark, as if, As far as he was concerned, Colbert had not even thought or said a word. "Your Majesty is aware," he said, "that I destined my estate at Vaux to receive the most amiable of princes, the most powerful of monarchs. And I have come now, sire, to inform your Majesty that I am ready to obey your orders in every respect." "Do you promise me many wonders, Monsieur le Surintendant?" said Louis, looking at Colbert. "Wonders? Oh, no, sire, I do not undertake that. I hope to be able to procure your Majesty a little pleasure, perhaps even a little forgetfulness of the cares of state." "Nay, Nahum Fouquet," returned the king, "I insist upon the word wonders. You are a magician, I believe. We all know the power you wield. We also know that you can find gold even when there is none to be found elsewhere, so much so, indeed, that people say you coin it." Fouquet felt that the shot was discharged from a double quiver, and that the king had launched an arrow from his own bow as well as one from Colbert's. "Oh," said he, laughingly, "the people know perfectly well at what mine I procure the gold, and they know it only too well, perhaps besides," he added. "I can assure your Majesty that the gold destined to pay the expenses of the fete at Vaux will cost neither blood nor tears. Hard labor may, perhaps, but that can be paid for." Louis paused, quite confused. He wished to look at Colbert. Colbert, too, wished to reply to him. A glance as swift as an eagle's, a king-like glance, indeed, which Fouquet darted at the latter, arrested the words upon his lips. The king, who had by this time recovered his self-possession, turned towards Fouquet, saying, "I presume, therefore, I am now to consider myself formally invited?" "Yes, sire, if your Majesty will condescend so far as to accept my invitation." "What day have you fixed?" "You speak like an enchanter who is but to conjure up in actuality the wildest fancies, Monsieur Fouquet. I cannot say so much, indeed, myself. Your Majesty will do, whenever you please, everything that a monarch can and ought to do. The King of France has servants at his bidding who are able to do anything on his behalf, to accomplish everything to gratify his pleasures." Colbert tried to look at the superintendent, in order to see whether this remark was an approach to less hostile sentiments on his part, but Fouquet had not even looked at his enemy, and Colbert hardly seemed to exist as far as he was concerned. "Very good, then," said the king. "Will a weekend suit you?" "Perfectly well, sire." "This is Tuesday. If I give you until next Sunday week, will that be sufficient? The delay which your Majesty deigns to accord me will greatly aid the various works which my architects have in hand for the purpose of adding to the amusement of your Majesty and your friends." "By the by, speaking of my friends," resumed the king, "how do you intend to treat them?" "The king is master everywhere, sire. Your Majesty will draw up your own list and give your own orders. All those you may deign to invite will be my guests, my honored guests, indeed." "I thank you," returned the king, touched by the noble thought expressed in so noble a tone. Fouquet, therefore, took leave of Louis XIV, after a few words had been added with regard to the details of certain matters of business. He felt that Colbert would remain behind with the king, that they would both converse about him, and that neither of them would spare him in the least degree. The satisfaction of being able to give a last and terrible blow to his enemy seemed to him almost like a compensation for everything they were about to subject him to. He turned back again immediately, as soon, indeed, as he had reached the door, and addressing the king, said, "I was forgetting that I had to crave your Majesty's forgiveness." "In what respect?" said the king, graciously. "For having committed a serious fault without perceiving it." "A fault? You? Ah, Monsieur Fouquet, I shall be unable to do otherwise than forgive you. In what way or against whom have you been found wanting?" "Against every sense of propriety, sire. I forgot to inform your Majesty of a circumstance that has lately occurred of some little importance." "What is it?" Colbert trembled. He fancied that he was about to frame a denunciation against him. His conduct had been unmasked. A single syllable from Fouquet, a single proof formally advanced, and before the youthful loyalty of feeling which guided Louis XIV, Colbert's favor would disappear at once. The latter trembled, therefore, lest so daring a blow might overthrow his whole scaffold. In point of fact, the opportunity was so admirably suited to be taken advantage of that a skillful, practiced player like Aramis would not have let it slip. "Sire," said Fouquet with an easy, unconcerned air, since you have had the kindness to forgive me. I am perfectly indifferent about my confession. This morning I sold one of the official appointments I hold. One of your appointments, said the king. Which? Colbert turned perfectly livid. That which conferred upon me, sire, a grand gown and a stern air gravity. The appointment of procureur general. The king involuntarily uttered a loud exclamation and looked at Colbert, who, with his face bedewed with perspiration, felt almost on the point of fainting. To whom have you sold this department, Monsieur Fouquet? Inquired the king. Colbert was obliged to lean against the column of the fireplace. To a councillor belonging to the Parliament, sire, whose name is Vanel. Vanel? Yes, sire, a particular friend of the intendant Colbert, added Fouquet, letting every word fall from his lips with the most inimitable nonchalance and with an admirably assumed expression of forgetfulness and ignorance. And having finished and having overwhelmed Colbert beneath the weight of this superiority, the superintendent again saluted the king and quitted the room, partially revenged by the stupefaction of the king and the humiliation of the favorite. Is it really possible, said the king, as soon as Fouquet had disappeared, that he has sold that office? Yes, sire, said Colbert meaningly. He must be mad, the king added. Colbert this time did not reply. He had penetrated the king's thought, a thought which amply revenged him for the humiliation he had just been made to suffer. His hatred was augmented by a feeling of bitter jealousy of Fouquet, and a threat of disgrace was now added to the plan he had arranged for his ruin. Colbert felt perfectly assured that for the future, between Louis XIV and himself, their hostile feelings and ideas would meet with no obstacles, and that at the first fault committed by Fouquet, which would be laid hold of as a pretext, the chastisement so long impending would be precipitated. Fouquet had thrown aside his weapons of defense, and hate and jealousy had picked them up. Colbert was invited by the king to the fete at Vaux. He bowed like a man confident in himself, and accepted the invitation with the air of one who almost confers a favor. The king was about writing down Saint-Aignan's name on his list of royal commands, when the usher announced the Comte de Saint-Aignan. As soon as the royal Mercury entered, Colbert discreetly withdrew. Saint-Aignan had quitted Louis XIV hardly a couple of hours before, but in the first effervescence of his affection, whenever Louis XIV was out of sight of La Vallière, he was obliged to talk about her. Besides, the only person with whom he could speak about her at his ease was Saint-Aignan, and thus Saint-Aignan had become an indispensable. "Of what traveling party are you speaking, sire?" inquired Saint-Aignan. "The one we are making up to go to the fete the superintendent is about to give at Vaux." "Ah, Saint-Aignan, you will at last see a fete, a royal fete, by the side of which all our amusements at Fontainebleau are petty, contemptible affairs. At Vaux, the superintendent going to give a fete in your majesty's honor? Nothing more than that." "Nothing more than that, do you say? It is very diverting to find you treating it with so much disdain. Are you who express such an indifference on the subject aware that as soon as it is known that M. Fouquet is going to receive me at Vaux next Sunday week, people will be striving their very utmost to get invited to the fete? I repeat, Saint-Aignan, you shall be one of the invited guests." "Very well, sire, unless I shall, in the meantime, have undertaken a longer and a less agreeable journey." "What journey do you allude to?" "The one across the Styx, sire." "Bah!" said Louis XIV, laughing. "No, seriously, sire," replied Saint-Aignan. "I am invited, and in such a way, in truth, that I hardly know what to say or how to act in order to refuse the invitation." "Very well. If your majesty will deign to listen to me, I will not keep your mind on the rack a moment longer. Speak. Your majesty knows the Baron du Vallon?" "Yes, indeed, a good servant to my father, the late king, and an admirable companion at table. For, I think, you are referring to the gentleman who dined with us at Fontainebleau? Or to get me killed, which is much the same thing." "The deuce!" "Such is that excellent person's present idea. Be easy. I will defend you if he be in the wrong." "Ah, there is an if." "Your majesty shall be the judge. What have you done to him?" "To him, personally, nothing at all. But it seems to one of his friends it is all the same. Is his friend one of the celebrated four? No, it is the son of one of the celebrated four. Though, what have you done to the son? Come, tell me. Why, it seems that I have helped someone to take his mistress from him. I cannot help confessing it, for it is true. In that case, you are wrong, and if he were to kill you, he would be doing perfectly right. Do you think a bad way? It is a very expeditious way, at all events. Good justice is prompt. So my grandfather, Henry IV, used to say, in that case, your majesty will, perhaps, be good enough to sign my adversary's pardon, for he is now waiting for me at the Minims, for the purpose of putting me out of my misery. There is a parchment upon your majesty's table, and for his name, the Vicomte de Bragelonne, sire. The Vicomte de Bragelonne, exclaimed the king, changing from fit of laughter to most profound stupor, and then, after a moment's silence, while he wiped his forehead, which was bedewed with perspiration, he again murmured, Bragelonne, no other, sire. Bragelonne, who was affianced to... Yes, sire. But he has been in London. Yes, but I can assure you, sire, he is there no longer. Is he in Paris, then? He is at Minims, sire, where he is waiting for me, as I have already had the honor of telling you. Does he know all? Yes, and many things besides. Perhaps your majesty would like to look at the letter I have received from him. And Saint Aignan drew from his pocket the note we are already acquainted with. When your majesty has read the letter, I will tell you how it reached me. The king read it in a great agitation, and immediately said, Well, sire, your majesty knows a certain carved lock, closing a certain door of carved ebony, which separates a certain apartment from a certain blue and white sanctuary. Of course, Louise's boudoir. Yes, sire. Well, it was in the keyhole of that lock that I found yonder note. Who placed it there? Either M. de Bragelonne or the devil himself. But inasmuch as the note smells of musk and not of sulphur, I conclude that it must be not the devil, but M. de Bragelonne. Louis bent his head, and seemed absorbed in sad and bitter thought. Perhaps something like remorse was at that moment passing through his heart. The secret is discovered, he said. Sire, I shall do my utmost that the secret dies in the breast of the man who possesses it, said Saint Aignan, in a tone of bravado, as he moved toward the door. But a gesture of the king made him pause. Where are you going? He inquired. Where they await me, sire. What for? To fight, in all probability. You fight, exclaimed the king. One moment, if you please, Monsieur le Comte. Saint Aignan shook his head, as a rebellious child does, whenever anyone interferes to prevent him throwing himself into a well or playing with a knife. But, sire, he said, in the first place, continued the king, I want to be enlightened a little further. Upon all points, if your majesty will be pleased to interrogate me, replied Saint Aignan, I will throw what light I can. Who told you that M. de Bragelonne had penetrated into that room? The letter which I found in the keyhole told me. Who told you that it was de Bragelonne who put it there? Who but himself would have dared to undertake such a mission? You are right. How was he able to get into your rooms? Ah, that is very serious. Inasmuch as all the doors were closed, and my lackey, Basque, had the keys in his pocket. Your lackey must have been bribed. Impossible, sire. For if he had been bribed, those who did so would not have sacrificed the poor fellow, whom, it is not unlikely, they might want to turn to further use by and by, in showing so clearly that it was he whom they had made use of. Quite true. And now I can only form one conjecture. Tell me what it is, sire, and we shall see if it is the same that has presented itself to my mind. That he effected an entrance by means of the staircase. Alas, sire, that seems to me more than probable. There is no doubt that someone must have sold the secret of the trapdoor, either sold it or given it. Why do you make that distinction? Because there are certain persons, sire, who, being above the price of treason, give and do not sell. What do you mean? Oh, sire, Your Majesty's mind is too clear-sighted not to guess what I mean, and you will save me the embarrassment of naming the person I allude to. You are right. You mean Madam. I suppose her suspicions were aroused by her changing your lodgings. Madam has keys of the apartments of her maids of honor, and she is powerful enough to discover what no one but yourself could do, or she would not be able to discover anything. And you suppose, then, that my sister must have entered into an alliance with Bragelonne, and has informed him of all the details of the affair. Possibly even better still, for she perhaps accompanied him there. Which way? Through your own apartments. You think it impossible, sire? Well, listen to me. Your Majesty knows that Madame is very fond of perfumes. Yes, she acquired that taste from my mother. Vervain particularly. Yes, it is the scent she prefers to all others. Very good, sire. My apartments happen to smell very strongly of vervain. The king remained silent and thoughtful for a few moments, and then resumed. But why should Madame take Bragelonne's part against me? Saint Aignan could very easily have replied, a woman's jealousy. The king probed his friend to the bottom of his heart to ascertain if he had learned the secret of his flirtation with his sister-in-law. But Saint Aignan was not an ordinary courtier. He did not lightly run the risk of finding out family secrets, and he was too a friend of the Muses not to think very frequently of poor Vidus Naso, whose eyes shed so many tears in expiation of his crime for having once beheld something, one hardly knows what, in the palace of Augustus. He therefore passed by Madame's secret very skillfully. But as he had shown no ordinary sagacity in indicating Madame's presence in his rooms in company with Bragelonne, it was necessary, of course, for him to repay with interest the king's amour propre, and reply plainly to the question which had been put to him of, why has Madame taken Bragelonne's part against me? Why? Replied Saint Aignan. Your Majesty forgets, I presume, that the Comte de Gay is the intimate friend of the Vicomte de Bragelonne. I do not see the connection, however, said the king. Ah, I beg your pardon then, sire, but I thought the Comte de Gay was a very great friend of Madame's. Quite true, the king returned. There is no occasion to search any further. The blow came from that direction. And is not your Majesty of opinion that, in order to ward it off, it will be necessary to deal another blow? Yes, but not one of the kind given in the Bois de Vincennes, replied the king. You forget, sire, said Saint Aignan, that I am a gentleman and that I have been challenged. The challenge neither concerns nor was it intended for you. But I am the man, sire, who has been expected at the Minims, sire, during the last hour or more, and I shall be dishonored if I do not go. The first honor and duty of a gentleman is obedience to his sovereign. Sire, I order you to remain. Sire, obey, monsieur, as your Majesty pleases. Besides, I wish to have the whole of this affair explained. I wish to know how it is that I have been so insolently trifled with as to have the sanctuary of my affections pried into. It is not you, Saint Aignan, whose business is to punish those who have acted in this manner, for it is not your honor they have attacked, but my own. I implore your Majesty not to overwhelm M. de Bragelonne with your wrath, for although in the whole of this affair he may have shown himself deficient in prudence, he has not been so in his feelings of loyalty. Enough! I shall know how to decide between the just and the unjust, even in the height of my anger. But take care that not a word of this is breathed to Madame. But what am I to do with regard to M. de Bragelonne? He will be seeking me in every direction, and I shall either have spoken to him, or taken care that he has been spoken to, before the evening is over. Let me once more entreat your Majesty to be indulgent toward him. I have been indulgent long enough, Comte, said Louis XIV, frowning severely. It is now quite time to show certain persons that I am master in my own palace. The king had hardly pronounced these words, which betokened that a fresh feeling of irritation was mingling with the recollections of old, when an usher appeared at the door of the cabinet. What is the matter? Inquired the king, and why do you presume to come when I have not summoned you? Sire, said the usher, your Majesty desired me to permit M. le Comte de la Fère to pass freely on any and every occasion when he might wish to speak to your Majesty. Well, monsieur, M. le Comte de la Fère is now waiting to see your Majesty. The king and Saint Aignan at this reply exchanged a look which betrayed more uneasiness than surprise. Louis hesitated for a moment, but immediately afterwards, seeming to make up his mind, he said, "Go, Saint Aignan, and find Louise. Inform her of the plot against us. Do not let her be ignorant that Madame will return to her system of persecutions against her, and that she has set those to work who have found it far safer to remain neuter. Sire, if Louise gets nervous and frightened, reassure her as much as you can. Tell her that the king's affection is an impenetrable shield over her. If, which I suspect is the case, she already knows everything, or she has already been herself subjected to an attack of some kind or other from any quarter, tell her, be sure to tell her, Saint Aignan," added the king, trembling with passion, "tell her, I say, that this time, instead of defending her, I will avenge her, and that too so terribly that no one will in future even dare to raise his eyes towards her." "Is that all, sire?" "Yes, all. Go as quickly as you can, and remain faithful. For you who live in the midst of the stake of infernal torments have not, like myself, the hope of the paradise beyond it." Saint Aignan exhausted himself in protestations of devotion, took the king's hand, kissed it, and left the room radiant with delight. Chapter 58. King and Noble. The king endeavored to recover his self-possession as quickly as possible in order to meet M. de la Fère with an untroubled countenance. He clearly saw it was not mere chance that had induced the Comte's visit. He had some vague impression of its importance. But he felt that to a man of Athos's tone of mind, to one of such a high order of intellect, his first reception ought not to present anything neither disagreeable or otherwise than kind and courteous. As soon as the king had satisfied himself that, as far as appearances went, he was perfectly calm again, he gave directions to the ushers to introduce the Comte. A few minutes afterwards, Athos, in full court dress, and with his breast covered with the orders that he alone had the right to wear at the court of France, presented himself with so grave and solemn an air that the king perceived, at the first glance, that he was not deceived in his anticipations. Louis advanced a step toward the Comte, and with a smile held out his hand to him, over which Athos bowed with the air of the deepest respect. "Monsieur le Comte de la Fère," said the king rapidly, "you are so seldom here that it is a real piece of good fortune to see you." Athos bowed and replied, "I should wish always to enjoy the happiness of being near your majesty." The tone, however, in which this reply was conveyed, evidently signified, "I should wish to be one of your majesty's advisers, to save you the commission of faults." The king felt it so, and determined in this man's presence to preserve all the advantages which could be derived from his command over himself, as well as from his rank and position. "I see you have something to say to me," he said. "Had it not been so, I should not have presumed to present myself before your majesty." "Speak quickly. I am anxious to satisfy you," returned the king, seating himself. "I am persuaded," replied Athos, in a somewhat agitated tone of voice, "that your majesty will give me every satisfaction." "Ah," said the king, with a certain haughtiness of manner, "you have come to lodge a complaint here, then?" "It would be a complaint," returned Athos, "only in the event of your majesty. But if you will deign to permit me, sire, I will begin the conversation from the very commencement." "Do so. I am listening." "Your majesty will remember that at the period of the Duke of Buckingham's departure, I had the honor of an interview with you. At or about that period, I think I remember you did. Only, with regard to the subject of the conversation, I have quite forgotten it." Athos started as he replied, "I shall have the honor to remind your majesty of it. It was with regard to a formal demand I had addressed to you respecting a marriage which M. de Bragelonne wished to contract with Mademoiselle de la Vallière." "Ah," thought the king, "we have come to it now. I remember," he said aloud. "At that period," pursued Athos, "your majesty was so kind and generous towards M. de Bragelonne and myself, that not a single word which then fell from your lips has escaped my memory. And when I asked your majesty to accord me Mademoiselle de la Vallière's hand for M. de Bragelonne, you refused." "Quite true," said Louis dryly. "Alleging," Athos hastened to say, "that the young lady had no position in society." Louis could hardly force himself to listen with an appearance of royal propriety. "That," added Athos, "she had but little fortune." The king threw himself back in his armchair. that her extraction was indifferent, a renewed impatience on the part of the king. "And little Beauty," added Athos, pitilessly. This last bolt buried itself deep in the king's heart, and made him almost bound from his seat. "You have a good memory, monsieur," he said. "I invariably have, on occasions when I have had the distinguished honor of an interview with your majesty," retorted the Count, without being in the least disconcerted. "Very good. It is admitted that I said all that. And I thank your majesty for your remarks at the time, because they testified an interest in M. de Bragelonne which did him much honor. And you may possibly remember," said the king very deliberately, "that you had the greatest repugnance for this marriage." "Quite true, sire." "And that you solicited my permission, much against your own inclination?" "Yes, sire." "And finally, I remember, for I have a memory nearly as good as your own, I remember, I say, that you observed at the time, 'I do not believe that Mademoiselle de la Vallière loves M. de Bragelonne.' Is that true?" The blow told well, but Athos did not draw back. "Sire," he said, "I have already begged your majesty's forgiveness, but there are certain particulars in that conversation which are only intelligible from the denouement." "Well, what is the denouement, monsieur?" "This, that your majesty then said that you would defer the marriage out of regard for M. de Bragelonne's own interests." The king remained silent. "M. de Bragelonne is now so exceedingly unhappy that he cannot any longer defer asking your majesty for a solution of the matter." The king turned pale. Athos looked at him with fixed attention. "And what," said the king with considerable hesitation, "does M. de Bragelonne request?" "Precisely the very thing that I came to ask your majesty for at my last audience, namely, your majesty's consent to his marriage." The king remained perfectly silent. "The questions which refer to the different obstacles in the way are all now quite removed for us," continued Athos. "Mademoiselle de la Vallière, without fortune, birth, or beauty, is not the less on that account the only good match in the world for M. de Bragelonne, since he loves this young girl." The king pressed his hands impatiently together. "Does your majesty hesitate?" inquired the Count, without losing a particle of either his firmness or his politeness. "I do not hesitate. I refuse," replied the king. Athos paused a moment, as if to collect himself. "I have had the honor," he said in a mild tone, "to observe to your majesty that no obstacle now interferes with M. de Bragelonne's affections, and that his determination seems unalterable. There is my will, and that is an obstacle, I should imagine." "That is the most serious of all," Athos replied quickly. "Ah! And may we, therefore, be permitted to ask your majesty, with the greatest humility, your reason for this refusal?" "The reason? A question to me!" exclaimed the king. The king, leaning with both his hands upon the table, said, in a deep tone of concentrated passion, "You have lost all recollection of what is usual at court. At court, please to remember, no one ventures to put a question to the king." "Very true, sire, but if men do not question, they conjecture." "Conjecture? What may that mean, monsieur?" "Very frequently, sire, conjecture with regard to a particular subject implies a want of frankness on the part of the king." "Monsieur!" "And a want of confidence on the part of the subject," pursued Athos intrepidly. "You forget yourself," said the king, hurried away by anger in spite of all his self-control. The king rose. "Monsieur le Comte," he said, "I have now given you all the time I had at my disposal." This was a dismissal. "Sire," replied the Count, "I have not yet had time to tell your majesty what I came with the express object of saying, and I so rarely see your majesty that I ought to avail myself of the opportunity. Just now you spoke rudely of conjectures. You are now becoming offensive, monsieur." "Oh, sire, offend your majesty." "I never. All my life through I have maintained that kings are above all other men, not only from their rank and power, but from their nobleness of heart and their true dignity of mind. I never can bring myself to believe that my sovereign, he who passed his word to me, did so with mental reservation." "I will explain my meaning," said Athos coldly. "If, in refusing Mademoiselle de la Vallière to Monsieur de Bragelonne, Your Majesty had some other object in view than the happiness and fortune of the Vicomte. You perceive, monsieur, that you are offending me, if, in requiring the Vicomte to delay his marriage, your Majesty's only object was to remove the gentleman to whom Mademoiselle de la Vallière was engaged. Monsieur, I have heard it said so in every direction, sire. Your Majesty's affection for Mademoiselle de la Vallière is spoken of on all sides. The king tore his gloves, which he had been biting for some time. Woe to those, he cried, who interfere in my affairs. I have made up my mind to take a particular course, and I will break through every obstacle in my way. What obstacle? Said Athos. The king stopped short, like a horse which, having taken the bit between his teeth and run away, finds it has slipped it back again, and that his career is checked. I love Mademoiselle de la Vallière, he said suddenly, with mingled nobleness of feeling and passion. But, interrupted Athos, that does not preclude your Majesty from allowing M. de Bragelonne to marry Mademoiselle de la Vallière. The sacrifice is worthy of so great a monarch. It is fully merited by M. de Bragelonne, who has already rendered great service to your Majesty, and who may well be regarded as a brave and worthy man. Your Majesty, therefore, in renouncing the affection you entertain, offers a proof at once of generosity, gratitude, and good policy. Mademoiselle de la Vallière does not love M. de Bragelonne, said the king hoarsely. Does your Majesty know that be the case? Remarked Athos, with a searching look. I do know it. Since a very short time, then. For doubtless, had your Majesty known it when I first preferred my request, you would have taken the trouble to inform me of it. Since a very short time, it is true, monsieur. Athos remained silent for a moment, and then resumed. In that case, I do not understand why your Majesty should have sent him to Bragelonne to London. That exile, and most properly so, too, is a matter of astonishment to every one who regards your Majesty's honor with sincere affection. Who presumes to impugn my honor, Monsieur de la Vallière? The king's honor, sire, is made up of the honor of his whole nobility. Whenever the king offends one of his gentlemen, that is, whenever he deprives him of the smallest particle of his honor, it is from him, from the king himself, that portion of honor is stolen. Monsieur de la Vallière, said the king haughtily, sire, you sent M. de Bragelonne to London either before you were Mademoiselle de la Vallière's lover, or since you have become so. The king, irritated beyond measure, especially because he felt that he was being mastered, endeavored to dismiss Athos by a gesture. Sire, replied the Count, I will tell you all. I will not leave your presence until I have been satisfied by your Majesty or by myself. Satisfied if you prove to me that you are right. Satisfied if I prove to you that you are wrong. Nay, sire, you can but listen to me. I am old now, and I am attached to everything that is really great and really powerful in your kingdom. I am of those who have shed their blood for your father and for yourself, without ever having asked a single favor either from yourself or from your father. I have never inflicted the slightest wrong or injury on anyone in this world, and even kings are still my debtors. You can but listen to me. I repeat, I have come to ask you for an account of the honor of one of your servants whom you have deceived by a falsehood, or betrayed by want of heart of judgment. I know that these words irritate your Majesty, but the facts themselves are killing us. I know that you are endeavoring to find some means whereby to chastise me for my frankness, but I know also the chastisement I will implore God to inflict upon you when I relate to him your perjury and my son's unhappiness. The king, during these remarks, was walking hurriedly to and fro, his hand thrust into the breast of his coat, his head haughtily raised, his eyes blazing with wrath. Monsieur, he cried suddenly, if I acted toward you as a king, you would be already punished. But I am only a man, and I have the right to love in this world everyone who loves me, a happiness which is so rarely found. You cannot pretend to such a right as a man any more than as a king, sire, or if you intend to exercise that right in a loyal manner, you should have told M. de Bragelonne so, and not have exiled him. It is too great a condescension, monsieur, to discuss these things with you, interrupted Louis XIV. With that majesty of air and manner, he alone seemed able to give his look and his voice. I was hoping that you would reply to me, said the Count. You shall know my reply, monsieur. You already know my thoughts on the subject, was the Comte de la Vallière's answer. You have forgotten you are speaking to the king, monsieur. It is a crime. You have forgotten you are destroying the lives of two men, sire. It is a mortal sin. Leave the room. Not until I have said this. Son of Louis XIII, you begin your reign badly, for you begin by abduction and disloyalty. My race, myself too, are now freed from all that affection and respect towards you, which I made my son swear to observe in the vaults of St. Denis, in the presence of the relics of your noble forefathers. You are now become our enemy, sire, and henceforth we have nothing to do save with heaven alone, our sole master. Be warned, sire. What? Do you threaten? Oh, no, said Athos sadly. I have as little bravado as fear in my soul. The God of whom I spoke to you is now listening to me. He knows that for the safety and honor of your crown, I would even yet shed every drop of blood 20 years of civil and foreign warfare have left in my veins. I can well say, then, that I threaten the king as little as I threaten the man. But I tell you, sire, you lose two servants. For you have destroyed faith in the heart of the father and love in the heart of the son. The one ceases to believe in the royal word. The other no longer believes in the loyalty of the man or the purity of woman. The one is dead to every feeling of respect, the other to obedience. Adieu. Thus saying, Athos broke his sword across his knee, slowly placed the two pieces upon the floor, and saluting the king, who was almost choking from rage and shame, he quitted the cabinet. Louis, who sat near the table, completely overwhelmed, was several minutes before he could collect himself, but he suddenly rose and rang the bell violently. Tell D'Artagnan to come here, he said to the terrified ushers. Chapter 59. After the storm. Our readers will doubtlessly have been asking themselves how it happened that Athos, of whom not a word has been said for some time past, arrived so very opportunely at court. We will, without delay, endeavor to satisfy their curiosity. Porthos, faithful to his duty as an arranger of affairs, had, immediately after leaving the Palais Royal, set off to join Raoul at the Minims in the Bois de Vincennes, and had related everything, even to the smallest details, which had passed between Saint Aignan and himself. He finished by saying that the message which the king had sent to his favorite would probably not occasion more than a short delay, and that Saint Aignan, as soon as he could leave the king, would not lose a moment in accepting the invitation Raoul had sent him. But Raoul, less credulous than his old friend, had concluded from Porthos's recital that if Saint Aignan was going to the king, Saint Aignan would tell the king everything, and that the king would most assuredly forbid Saint Aignan to obey the summons he had received to the hostile meeting. The consequence of his reflections was that he had left Porthos to remain at the place appointed for the meeting, in the very improbable case that Saint Aignan would come there, having endeavored to make Porthos promise that he would not remain there more than an hour or an hour and a half at the very longest. Porthos, however, formally refused to do anything of the kind, but, on the contrary, installed himself in the Minims as if he were going to take root there, making Raoul promise that when he had been to see his father, he would return to his own apartments, in order that Porthos's servant might know where to find him in case de Saint Aignan should happen to come to the rendezvous. Bragelonne had left Vincennes, and proceeded at once straight to the apartments of Athos, who had been in Paris during the last 2 days, the Count having been already informed of what had taken place, by a letter from D'Artagnan. Raoul arrived at his father's. Athos, after having held out his hand to him, and embraced him most affectionately, made a sign for him to sit down. I know you come to me as a man would go to a friend, Vicomte, whenever he is suffering. Tell me, therefore, what is it that brings you now? The young man bowed and began his recital. More than once in the course of it, his tears almost choked his utterance, and a sob checked his throat, compelled him to suspend his narrative for a few minutes. Athos most probably already knew how matters stood, as we had just now said D'Artagnan had already written to him. But, preserving until the conclusion that calm, unruffled composure of manner which constituted the almost superhuman side of his character, he replied, Raoul, I do not believe there is a word of truth in these rumors. I do not believe in the existence of what you fear, although I do not deny that persons best entitled to the fullest credit have already conversed with me on the subject. In my heart and soul, I think it utterly impossible that the king could be guilty of such an outrage on a gentleman. I will answer for the king, therefore, and will soon bring you back the proof of what I say. Raoul, Wavering like a drunken man between what he'd seen with his own eyes and the imperturbable faith he had in a man who had never told a falsehood, bowed and simply answered, "Go, then, Monsieur le Comte. I will await your return." And he sat down, burying his face in his hands. Athos dressed, and then left him, in order to wait upon the king. The result of that interview is already known to our readers. When he returned to his lodgings, Raoul, pale and dejected, had not quitted his attitude of despair. At the sound, however, of the opening doors and of his father's footsteps as he approached him, the young man raised his head. Athos's face was very pale, his head uncovered, and his manner full of seriousness. He gave his cloak and hat to the lackey, dismissed him with a gesture, and sat down near Raoul. "Well, monsieur," inquired the young man, "are you convinced yet?" "I am, Raoul. The king loves Mademoiselle de la Vallière." "He confesses it, then?" cried Raoul. "Yes," replied Athos. "And she?" "He says that she loves him." "And what did you say to him, monsieur?" "Whether you're determined to adopt any steps." "Any steps? Regarding what?" "Oh, monsieur, with regard to my affection, I shall, perhaps, some day or other, succeed in tearing from my heart. I trust one shall do so, aided by heaven's merciful help and your own wise exhortations. As far as vengeance is concerned, it occurred to me only when under the influence of an evil thought, for I could not revenge myself upon the one who is actually guilty. I have, therefore, already renounced every idea of revenge. And you no longer think of seeking a quarrel with M. de Saint-Aignan?" "No, monsieur. I send him a challenge. If M. de Saint-Aignan accepts it, I will maintain it. If he does not take it up, I will leave things as they are." "And La Vallière? You cannot, I know, have seriously thought that I should dream of revenging myself upon a woman," replied Raoul, with a smile so sad that a tear started even to the eyes of his father, who had so many times in the course of his life bowed beneath his own sorrows and those of others. "Poor boy," he murmured. "You think that I still live in hope," said Raoul, "and you pity me. Oh, it is indeed horrible suffering for me to despise, as I am bound to do, the one I have loved so devotedly. If I had but some real cause of complaint against her, I should be happy. I should be able to forgive her." Athos looked at his son with a profoundly sorrowful air, for the words Raoul had just pronounced seemed to have issued out of his own heart. At this moment the servant announced M. d'Artagnan. This name sounded very differently to the ears of Athos and Raoul. The Musketeer entered the room with a vague smile on his lips. Raoul paused. Athos walked towards his friend with an expression of face that did not escape Bragelonne. D'Artagnan answered Athos's look by an imperceptible movement of the eyelid, and then, advancing toward Raoul, whom he took by the hand, he said, addressing both father and son, "Well, you are trying to console this poor boy, it seems. And you, kind and good as usual, have come to help me in my difficult task." As he said this, Athos pressed D'Artagnan's hand between both his own. Raoul fancied he observed in this pressure something beyond the sense his mere words conveyed. "Yes," replied the Musketeer, smoothing his mustache with the hand that Athos had left free. "Yes, I have come too. You are most welcome, Chevalier, not for the consolation you bring with you, but on your own account. I am already consoled," said Raoul, and he attempted to smile, but the effort was more sad than any tears D'Artagnan had ever seen shed. "That is all well and good, then," said D'Artagnan. "Only," continued Raoul, "you have arrived just as the Comte was about to give me the details of his interview with the king. You will allow the Comte to continue," added the young man, as, with his eyes fixed on the Musketeer, he seemed to read the very depths of his heart. "His interview with the king?" said D'Artagnan, in a tone so natural and unassumed that there was no means of suspecting that his astonishment was feigned. "You have seen the king, then, Athos?" Athos smiled as he said, "Yes, I have seen him." "Ah, indeed. You were unaware, then, that the Comte had seen his Majesty?" inquired Raoul, half reassured. "Yes, indeed, quite so." "In that case, I am less uneasy," said Raoul. "Uneasy and about what?" inquired Athos. "Forgive me, monsieur," said Raoul, but knowing so well the regard and affection you have for me, I was afraid you might possibly have expressed somewhat plainly to His Majesty my own sufferings and your indignation, and that the king had consequently. And that the king had consequently, repeated D'Artagnan. Well, go on. Finish what you're going to say. I have now to ask you to forgive me, Monsieur d'Artagnan, said Raoul. For a moment, and I cannot help confessing it, I trembled lest you had come here, not as M. d'Artagnan, but as captain of the Musketeers. You are mad, my poor boy, cried D'Artagnan, with a burst of laughter, in which an exact observer might perhaps have wished to have heard a little more frankness. So much the better, said Raoul. Yes, mad. And do you know what I would advise you to do? Tell me, monsieur, for the advice is sure to be good, as it comes from you. Very good, then. I advise you, after your long journey from England, after your visit to M. Dicichet, after your visit to Madame, after your visit to Porthos, after your journey to Vincennes, I advise you, I say, to take a few hours' rest, go and lie down, sleep for a dozen hours, and when you wake up, go and ride one of my horses until you have tired him to death. And drawing Raoul towards him, he embraced him as he would have done his own child. Athos did the like. Only it was very visible that the kiss was still more affectionate, and the pressure of his lips even warmer with the father than with the friend. The young man again looked at both his companions, endeavoring to penetrate their real meaning or their real feelings with the utmost strength of his intelligence. But his look was powerless upon the smiling countenance of the musketeer or upon the calm and composed features of the Comte de la Fère. "Where are you going, Raoul?" inquired the latter, seeing that Bragelonne was preparing to go out. "To my own apartments," replied the latter in his soft, sad voice. "We shall be sure to find you there. Then, if we should have anything to say to you—" "Yes, monsieur. But do you suppose it likely you will have something to say to me?" "How can I tell?" said Athos. "Yes, something fresh to console you with," said D'Artagnan, pushing him toward the door. Raoul, observing the perfect composure which marked every gesture of his two friends, quitted the Comte's room, carrying away with him nothing but the individual feeling of his own particular distress. "Thank heaven," he said, "since that is the case, I need only think of myself." And wrapping himself up in his cloak, in order to conceal from the passers-by in the streets his gloomy and sorrowful face, he quitted them, for the purpose of returning to his own rooms, as he had promised Porthos. The two friends watched the young man as he walked away with a feeling of genuine disinterested pity. Only each expressed it in a different way. "Poor Raoul," said Athos, sighing deeply. "Poor Raoul," said D'Artagnan, shrugging his shoulders. Chapter 60. "Hugh, miser." "Poor Raoul," had said Athos. "Poor Raoul," had said D'Artagnan. And, in point of fact, to be pitied by both these men, Raoul must indeed have been most unhappy. And therefore, when he found himself alone, face to face, as it were, with his own troubles, leaving behind him the intrepid friend and the indulgent father, when he recalled the avowal of the king's affection, which had robbed him of Louise de la Vallière, whom he loved so deeply, he felt his heart almost breaking, as indeed we all have at least once in our lives, at the first illusion destroyed, the first affection betrayed. "Oh," he murmured, "all is over then. Nothing is now left me in this world. Nothing to look forward to, nothing to hope for. Gueche has told me so. My father has told me so. D'Artagnan has told me so. All life is but an idle dream. The future which I have been hopelessly pursuing for the last 10 years is a dream. The union of hearts, a dream. A life of love and happiness, a dream. Poor fool that I am," he continued after a pause, "to dream away my existence aloud, publicly, and in the face of others, friends and enemies. And for what purpose, too? In order that my friends may be saddened by my troubles, and my enemies may laugh at my sorrows. And so my unhappiness will soon become a notorious disgrace, a public scandal. And who knows but that tomorrow I may even be a public laughingstock." And, despite the composure which he had promised his father and D'Artagnan to observe, Raoul could not resist uttering a few words of darkest menace. "And yet," he continued, "if my name were de Wardes, and if I had the pliancy of character and strength of will of M. d'Artagnan, I should laugh, with my lips at least. I should convince other women that this perfidious girl, honored by the affection I have wasted on her, leaves me only one regret, that of having been abused and deceived by her seemingly modest and irreproachable conduct. A few might perhaps fawn on the king by jesting at my expense. I should put myself on the track of some of those buffoons. I should chastise a few of them, perhaps. The men would fear me, and by the time I had laid 3 dying or dead at my feet, I should be adored by the women. Yes, that, indeed, would be the proper course to adopt, and the Comte de la Fere himself would not object to it. Has not he also been tried, in his earlier days, in the same manner as I had just been tried myself? Did he not replace affection by intoxication? He has often told me so. Why should I not replace love by pleasure? He must have suffered as much as I suffer, even more, if that is possible. The history of one man is the history of all, a dragging trial, more or less prolonged, more or less bitter, sorrowful. The note of human nature is nothing but one sustained cry. But what are the sufferings of others compared to those from which I am now suffering? What does that need? To have a heart no longer, or forget that I ever had one? To be strong, even against weakness itself? To lean always, even when one feels that the support is giving way? What is needed to attain or succeed in all that? To be young, handsome, strong, valiant, rich. I am, or shall be, all that. But honor, he still continued. And what is honor after all? A theory which every man understands in his own way. My father tells me, honor is a consideration of what is due to others, and particularly what is due to oneself. But Guéché and Manicamp, and Saint Aignan particularly, would say to me, what's honor? Honor consists in studying and yielding to the passions and pleasures of one's king. Honor such as that, indeed, is easy and productive enough. With honor like that, I can keep my post at the court, become a gentleman of the chamber, and accept the command of a regiment, which may at any time be presented to me. With honor such as that, I can be duke and peer. The stain which that woman has stamped upon me, the grief that has broken my heart, the heart of the friend and playmate of her childhood, in no way affects M. de Bragelonne, an excellent officer, a courageous leader, who will cover himself with glory at the first encounter, and who will become 100 times greater than Mademoiselle de la Vallière is today, the mistress of the king, for the king will not marry her, and the more publicly he will proclaim her as his mistress, the more opaque will grow the shadow of shame he casts upon her face in the guise of a crown, and in proportion as others despise, as I despise her, I shall be gleaning honors in the field. Alas, we had walked together side by side, she and I, during the earliest, the brightest, the most angelic portion of our existence, hand in hand along the charming path of life, covered with the blossoms of youth, and then, alas, we reach a crossroad where she separates herself from me, in which we have to follow a different route, whereby we become more and more widely separated from each other. And to attain the end of this path, oh, heaven! I am now alone, in utter despair and crushed to the very earth. Such were the sinister reflections in which Raoul indulged, when his foot mechanically paused at the door of his own dwelling. He had reached it without remarking the streets through which he passed, without knowing how he had come. He pushed open the door, continued to advance, and ascended the staircase. The staircase, as in most of the houses at that period, was very dark, and the landings most obscure. Raoul lived on the first floor. He paused and ordered a ring. Olivain appeared, took his sword and cloak from his hands. Raoul himself opened the door which, from the antechamber, led into a small salon, richly furnished enough for the salon of a young man, and completely filled with flowers by Olivain, who, knowing his master's tastes, had shown himself studiously attentive in gratifying them, without caring whether his master perceived his attention or not. There was a portrait of La Vallière in the salon, which had been drawn by herself and given by her to Raoul. This portrait, fastened above a large easy-chair covered with dark-colored damask, was the first point towards which Raoul bent his steps, the first object on which he fixed his eyes. It was, moreover, Raoul's usual habit to do so. Every time he entered his room, this portrait, before anything else, attracted his attention. This time, as usual, he walked straight up to the portrait, placed his knees upon the armchair, and paused to look at it sadly. His arms were crossed upon his breast, his head slightly thrown back, his eyes filled with tears, his mouth worked into a bitter smile. He looked at the portrait of the one he had so tenderly loved, and then all that it had passed before his mind again, all that it suffered seemed again to assail his heart. And after a long silence, he murmured for the third time, "Miserable, unhappy wretch that I am." He had hardly pronounced these words when he heard the sound of a sigh and a groan behind him. He turned sharply round and perceived, in the angle of the salon, standing up, a bending, veiled female figure, which had been the means of concealing behind the door as he opened it, and which he had not perceived as he entered. He advanced towards the figure, whose presence in his room had not been announced to him, and as he bowed and inquired at the same moment who she was, she suddenly raised her head and removed the veil from her face, revealing her pale and sorrow-stricken features. Raoul staggered back as if he had seen a ghost. Mademoiselle de la Vallière, for it was indeed she, advanced a few steps towards him. "Yes, Louise," she murmured. But this interval, short as it had been, was quite sufficient for Raoul to recover himself. "You, mademoiselle?" he said, and then added, in an indefinable tone, "You here?" "Yes, Raoul," the young girl replied. "I have been waiting for you." "I beg your pardon. When I came into the room, I was not aware." Nothing could produce a greater effect upon Louise than these few words, which seemed to signify, "You see that I still understand you." She passed a handkerchief across her eyes in order to remove a rebellious tear which she could not restrain. And then, having collected herself for a moment, she said, "Raoul, do not turn your kind, frank look away from me. You are not one of those men who despise a woman for having given her heart to another, even though her affection might render him unhappy or might wound his pride." Raoul did not reply. Raoul continued to preserve the same unbroken silence. La Vallière looked at it with an air that seemed to say, "Encourage me, for pity's sake, but a single word." But Raoul did not open his lips, and the young girl was obliged to continue. "Just now," she said, "de Saint-Aignan came to me by the king's directions." She cast down her eyes as she said this, while Raoul on his side turned his away in order to avoid looking at her. "De Saint-Aignan came to me from the king," she repeated, "and told me that you knew all." And she attempted to look Raoul in the face after inflicting this further wound upon him, in addition to the many others he had already received, but it was impossible to meet Raoul's eyes. "He told me you were incensed with me, and justly so, I admit." This time Raoul looked at the young girl, and a smile full of disdain passed across his lips. "Oh," she continued, "I entreat you, do not say that you have had any other feeling against me than that of anger merely. Raoul, wait until I have told you all. Wait until I have said to you all that I had to say, all that I came to say." Raoul, by the strength of his iron will, forced his features to assume a calmer expression, and the disdainful smile upon his lip passed away. "In the first place," said La Vallière, "in the first place, with my hands raised in entreaty towards you, with my forehead bowed to the ground before you, I entreat you, as the most generous, as the noblest of men, to pardon, to forgive me. If I have left you in ignorance of what was passing in my own bosom, never, at least, would I have consented to deceive you. Oh, I entreat you, Raoul, I implore you on my knees, answer me one word, even though you wrong me in doing so. Better, far better, an injurious word from your lips than suspicion resting in your heart." "I admire your subtlety of expression, mademoiselle," said Raoul, making an effort to remain calm. "To leave another in ignorance that you are deceiving him is loyal, but to deceive him, it seems that would be very wrong, and that you would not do it. Monsieur, for a long time I thought that I loved you better than anything else, and so long as I believed in my affection for you, I told you that loved you. I could have sworn on the altar, but a day came when I was undeceived. Well, on that day, mademoiselle, knowing that I still continue to love you, true loyalty of conduct should have forced you to inform me you had ceased to love me. But on that day, Raoul, on that day, when I read in the depths of my own heart, when I confessed to myself that you no longer fill my mind entirely, when I saw another future before me than that of being your friend, your lifelong companion, your wife, on that day, Raoul, you were not, alas, any more beside me, but you knew where I was, mademoiselle. You could have written to me. Raoul, I did not dare to do so. Raoul, I have been weak and cowardly. I knew you so thoroughly. I knew how devotedly you loved me, that I trembled at the bare idea of the grief I was about to cause you. And that is so true, Raoul, that this very moment I am now speaking to you, bending thus before you, my heart crushed in my bosom, my voice full of sighs, my eyes full of tears. It is so perfectly true that I have no other defense than my frankness. I have no other sorrow greater than that which I read in your eyes. Raoul attempted to smile. No, said the young girl with a profound conviction. No, no. You will not do me so foul a wrong as to disguise your feelings before me now. You love me. You were sure of your affection for me. You did not deceive yourself. You do not lie to your own heart. Whilst and pale as death, her arms thrown despairingly above her head, she fell upon her knees. Whilst you, said Raoul, you told me you loved me, and yet you loved another. Alas, yes, cried the poor girl. Alas, yes, I do love another, and that other, oh, for heaven's sake let me say it, Raoul, for it is my only excuse, that other I love better than my own life, better than my own soul even. Forgive my fault, or punish my treason, Raoul. I came here in no way to defend myself, but merely to say to you, you know what it is to love. In such a case am I. I love to that degree that I would give my life, my very soul, to the man I love. If he should ever cease to love me, I shall die of grief and despair, unless heaven come to my assistance, unless heaven does show pity upon me. Raoul, I came here to submit myself to your will, whatever it might be, to die, if it were your wish I should die. Kill me, then, Raoul, if in your heart you believe I deserve death. Take care, mademoiselle, said Raoul. The woman who invites death is one who has nothing but her heart's blood offered to her deceived and betrayed lover. You are right, she said. Raoul uttered a deep sigh as he exclaimed, and you love without being able to forget. I love without a wish to forget, without a wish ever to love anyone else, replied La Vallière. Oh, said La Vallière, I do not ask you so much as that, Raoul. I only am to blame, mademoiselle, continued Raoul, better informed than yourself of the difficulties of this life. I should have enlightened you. I ought not to have relied upon uncertainty. I ought to have extracted an answer from your heart, whilst I hardly even sought an acknowledgment from your lips. Once more, mademoiselle, it is I who ask your forgiveness. Impossible, impossible, she cried. You are mocking me. How impossible? Yes, it is impossible to be so good and kind, perfect to such a degree as that. Take care, said Raoul with a bitter smile, for presently you may say perhaps I did not love you. Oh, you love me like an affectionate brother. Let me hope that, Raoul, as a brother. Undeceive yourself, Louise. I love you as a lover, as a husband, with the deepest, the truest, the fondest affection. Raoul, as a brother. Oh, Louise, I love you so deeply that I would have shed my blood for you, drop by drop. I would, oh, how willingly, have suffered myself to be torn to pieces for your sake, have sacrificed my very future for you. I love you so deeply, Louise, that my heart feels dead and crushed within me. My faith in human nature all is gone. My eyes have lost their light. I love you so deeply that I now no longer think of, care for anything, either in this world or the next. Raoul, dear Raoul, spare me, I implore you, cried La Vallière. Oh, if I had but known. It is too late, Louise. You love. You are happy in your affection. I read your happiness through your tears. Behind the tears which the loyalty of your nature makes you shed, I feel the sighs your affection breathes forth. Louise, you have made me the most abjectly wretched man living. Leave me, I entreat you. Adieu, adieu. Forgive me. Oh, forgive me, Raoul, for what I have done. And to tell you that, do you hear me, Louise? To tell you that, at such a moment as this, to tell you that, as I have told you, is to pronounce my own sentence of death. Adieu. La Vallière held out her hands to him in vain. We ought not to see each other again in this world, he said. And as she was on the point of crying out in bitter agony at this remark, he placed his hand on her mouth to stifle the exclamation. She pressed her lips upon it, and fell fainting to the ground. "Olivain," said Raoul, "take this young lady and bear her to the carriage which is waiting for her at the door." As Olivain lifted her up, Raoul made a movement as if to dart towards La Vallière in order to give her a first and last kiss. But, stopping abruptly, he said, "No, she is not mine. I am no thief, as is the King of France." And he returned to his room, whilst the lackey carried La Vallière, still fainting, to the carriage. As soon as Raoul had quitted Athos and D'Artagnan, as the two exclamations that had followed his departure escaped their lips, they found themselves face to face alone. Athos immediately resumed the earnest air that he had assumed at D'Artagnan's arrival. "Well," he said, "what have you come to announce to me, my friend?" "I?" inquired D'Artagnan. "Yes, I do not see you in this way without some reason for it," said Athos, smiling. "The deuce!" said D'Artagnan. "Well, I must say he is not altogether pleased." "My dear friend, you have hit the very mark." "Oh, I expected it. I am quite ready to go with you." "Deuce take it," said D'Artagnan. "What a hurry you are in." "I am afraid of delaying you," said Athos, smiling. "If you will be good enough to tell me, I will listen with the greatest of pleasure," said Athos, pointing out to D'Artagnan a large chair, into which the latter threw himself, assuming the easiest possible attitude. "Well, I will do so willingly enough," continued D'Artagnan, "for the conversation is rather curious, I must say. In the first place, the king sent for me. As soon as I had left, you were just going down the last steps of the staircase, as the Musketeers told me. I arrived. My dear Athos, he was not red in the face merely, he was positively purple. I was not aware, of course, of what had passed. Only on the ground, lying on the floor, I saw a sword broken in two. 'Captain D'Artagnan,' cried the king, as soon as he saw me. 'M. de la Fère has just left me. He is an insolent man.' 'An insolent man!' I exclaimed, in such a tone that the king stopped suddenly short. I have, out of consideration for M. de la Fère, wished to spare him. He is a man of whom I still retain some kind recollections. The discredit of being arrested in my palace. You will therefore take a carriage." At this, I made a slight movement. "If you object to arrest him yourself," continued the king, "send me my captain of the guards." "I should not like to annoy you," said the king kindly, "for you have always served me well, Monsieur d'Artagnan." "You do not annoy me, sire," I replied. "I am on duty, that is all." "But," said the king in astonishment, "I believe the Comte is your friend?" "If he were my father, sire, it would not make me less on duty than I am." The king looked at me. He saw how unmoved my face was, and seemed satisfied. "You will arrest Le Comte de la Fère, then?" he inquired. "Most certainly, sire, if you give me the order to do so." "Very well, I order you to do so." I bowed and replied, "Where's the Comte, sire?" "You will look for him." "And am I to arrest him wherever he may be?" "Yes, but try that he may be at his own house. If he should have started for his own estate, leave Paris at once, and arrest him on his way thither." I bowed, but as I did not move, he said, "Well, what are you waiting for?" "For the order to arrest the Comte, signed by yourself." The king seemed annoyed, for, in point of fact, it was the exercise of a fresh act of authority, a repetition of the arbitrary act, if indeed it is to be considered as such. He took hold of his pen slowly, and evidently in no very good temper, and then he wrote, "Order for M. Le Chevalier d'Artagnan, captain of my Musketeers, to arrest M. Le Comte de la Fère, wherever he is to be found." He then turned toward me, but I was looking on without moving a muscle of my face. In all probability, he thought he perceived something like bravado in my tranquil manner, for he signed hurriedly, and then handing me the order, he said, "Go, monsieur." I obeyed, and here I am. Athos pressed his friend's hand. "Well, let us set off," he said. "Oh, surely," said D'Artagnan. "You must have some trifling matters to arrange before you leave your apartments in this manner." "I, not at all." "Why not?" "Why," You know, D'Artagnan, that I have always been a very simple traveler on this earth, ready to go to the end of the world by the order of my sovereign, ready to quit it at the summons of my Maker. What does a man who is thus prepared require in such a case? A portmanteau or a shroud? I am ready at this moment, as I have always been, my dear friend, and can accompany you at once. But, Bragelonne, I have brought him up in the same principles I laid down for my own guidance, and you observe that as soon as he perceived you, he guessed, that very moment, the motive of your visit. We have thrown him off his guard for a moment. But do not be uneasy. He is sufficiently prepared for my disgrace not to be too much alarmed at it. So let us go. Very well, let us go, said D'Artagnan quietly. As I broke my sword in the king's presence and threw the pieces at his feet, I presume that will dispense with the necessity of delivering it over to you. You are quite right. And besides that, what the deuce do you suppose I could do with your sword? Am I to walk behind or before you? Inquired Athos, laughing. You will walk arm in arm with me, replied D'Artagnan, as he took the Count's arm to descend the staircase, and in this manner they arrived at the landing. Grimaud, whom they had met in the anteroom, looked at them as they went out together in this manner, with some little uneasiness. His experience of affairs was quite sufficient to give him good reason to suspect that there was something wrong. To take a turn in my carriage, interrupted D'Artagnan, with a friendly nod of the head. Grimaud thanked D'Artagnan by a grimace, which was evidently intended for a smile, and accompanied both the friends to the door. Athos entered first into the carriage. D'Artagnan followed him without saying a word to the coachman. The departure had taken place so quietly that it excited no disturbance or attention even in the neighborhood. When the carriage had reached the quays, "You are taking me to the Bastille, I perceive," said Athos. "Aye," said D'Artagnan. "I take you wherever you may choose to go. Nowhere else, I can assure you." "What do you mean?" said the Count, surprised. "Why, surely, my dear friend," said D'Artagnan, "you quite understand that I undertook the mission with no other object in view than that of carrying out exactly as you liked. You surely did not expect that I was going to get you thrown into prison like that, brutally and without any reflection. If I had anticipated that, I should have let the captain of the guards undertake it." "And so," said Athos, "and so, I repeat again, we will go wherever you may choose." "My dear friend," said Athos, embracing D'Artagnan, "how like you that is! Well, it seems simple enough to me. The coachman will take you to the barrier of the Cours Lorraine. You will find a horse there which I have ordered to be kept ready for you. With that horse you will be able to do 3 posts without stopping, and I, on my side, will take care not to return the king, to tell him that you have gone away, until the very moment it will be impossible to overtake you. In the meantime you will have reached Le Havre, and from Le Havre across to England, where you will find a charming residence at which M. Monk made me a present, without speaking of the hospitality which King Charles will not fail to show you. Well, what do you think of this project?" Athos shook his head, and then said, smiling as he did so, "No, no, take me to the Bastille." "On what subject?" "That you are no longer 20 years of age. Believe me, I speak according to my own knowledge and experience. A prison is certain death for men who are at our time of life. No, no, I will never allow you to languish in prison in such a way. Why, the very thought of it makes my head turn giddy." "Dear D'Artagnan," Athos replied, "Heaven most fortunately made my body as strong, powerful, and enduring as my mind, and rely upon it, I shall retain my strength up to the very last moment. But this is not strength of mind or character. It is sheer madness." "Oh, that is all the same to me, and king though he be, I would plainly tell him, 'Sire, imprison, exile, kill everyone in France and Europe. Order me to arrest and poniard even whom you like, even were it Monsieur, your own brother, but do not touch one of the 4 Musketeers, or so Mordiaux." "My dear friend," replied Athos with perfect calmness, "I should like to persuade you of one thing, namely, that I wish to be arrested, that I desire above all things that my arrest should take place. Nay, I wish it, I repeat, more than anything. If you were to let me escape, it would be only to return of my own accord and constitute myself a prisoner. I wish to prove to this young man, who is dazzled by the power and splendor of his crown, that he can be regarded as the first and chiefest among men only on the one condition of his proving himself to be the most generous and the wisest. He may punish me, imprison, torture me. It matters not. He abuses his opportunities, and I wish him to learn the bitterness of remorse, while heaven teaches him what chastisement is." "Well, well," replied D'Artagnan, "I know only too well that when you once said, 'No, you mean no, I do not insist any longer. You wish to go to Bastille?' I do wish to go there." "Let us go, then, to the Bastille," cried D'Artagnan to the coachman, and throwing himself back in the carriage, he gnawed the ends of his mustache with a fury which, for Athos, who knew him well, signified a resolution either already taken or in course of formation. A profound silence ensued in the carriage, which continued to roll on, but neither faster nor slower than before. Athos took the Musketeer by the hand. "You are not angry with me, D'Artagnan?" he said. "Oh, no. Certainly not. Of course not. What you do for heroism, I should have done from obstinacy. But you are quite of opinion, are you not, that heaven will avenge me, D'Artagnan? And I know one or two on earth who will not fail to lend a helping hand," said the captain. Chapter 63. 3 guests astonished to find themselves at supper together. The carriage arrived at the outside of the gate of the Bastille. A soldier on guard stopped it, but D'Artagnan had only to utter a single word to procure admittance, and the carriage passed on without further difficulty. Whilst they were proceeding along the covered way which led to the courtyard of the governor's residence, D'Artagnan, whose lynx eyes saw everything, even through the walls, suddenly cried out, "What is that out yonder?" "Well," said Athos quietly, "what is it?" "Look yonder, Athos." "Yes, yes, make haste." At that very moment, a second sentinel stopped D'Artagnan, and while the formalities were being gone through, Athos could see at 100 paces from him the man whom his friend had pointed out to him. He was, in fact, getting out of the carriage at the door of the governor's house. "Well," inquired D'Artagnan, "do you see him?" "What do you say of him?" "I cannot very well tell. He is, as I just now told you, a man in a gray suit who is getting out of a carriage. That is all." "Athos, I will wager anything that it is he." "He who?" "Aramis arrested? Impossible. I do not say he is arrested, since we see him alone in his carriage." "Well, then, what is he doing here?" "Oh, he knows Baisemeaux, the governor," replied the Musketeer slyly. "So we have arrived just in time." "What for?" "In order to see what we can see. I regret this meeting exceedingly. When Aramis sees me, he will be very much annoyed in the first place at seeing me, and in the next at being seen. Unfortunately, there is no remedy for it. Whenever anyone meets another in Bastille, even if he wished to draw back to avoid him, it would be impossible. Athos, I have an idea. The question is, to spare Aramis the annoyance you were speaking of, is it not? What is to be done? I will tell you, or in order to explain myself in the best possible way, let me relate the affair in my own manner. I will not recommend you to tell a falsehood, for that would be impossible for you to do. But I will tell falsehoods enough for both. It is easy to do that when one is born to the nature and habits of a Gascon." Athos smiled. The carriage stopped where the one we had just now pointed out had stopped, namely, at the door of the governor's house. "It is understood, then," said D'Artagnan, in a low voice to his friend. Athos consented by a gesture. They ascended the staircase. There will be no occasion for surprise at the facility with which they had entered into Bastille, if it be remembered that, before passing the first gate, in fact, the most difficult of all, D'Artagnan had announced that he had brought a prisoner of state. At the third gate, on the contrary, that is to say, when he had once fairly entered the prison, he merely said to the sentinel, to Baisemeaux, and they both passed on. In a few minutes they were in the governor's dining room, and the first face which attracted D'Artagnan's observation was that of Aramis, who was seated side by side with Baisemeaux, awaiting the announcement of a meal whose odor impregnated the whole apartment. If D'Artagnan pretended surprise, Aramis did not pretend at all. He started when he saw his two friends, and his emotion was very apparent. Athos and D'Artagnan, however, complimented him as usual, and Baisemeaux, amazed, completely stupefied by the presence of his three guests, began to perform a few evolutions around them. By what lucky accident? "We were just going to ask you," retorted D'Artagnan. "Are we going to give ourselves up as prisoners?" cried Aramis, with an affection of hilarity. Ah, said D'Artagnan. "It is true the walls smell deucedly like a prison. Monsieur de Baisemeaux, you know you invited me to sup with you the other day." "Aye," cried Baisemeaux. "Yes, of course you did, although you now seem so struck with amazement. Don't you remember it?" Baisemeaux turned pale and then red, looked at Aramis, who looked at him, and finished by stammering out, "Certainly, I am delighted, but upon my honor, I have not the slightest. I have such a wretched memory." "Well, I am wrong, I see," said D'Artagnan, as if he were offended. "Wrong to remember anything about it, it seems." Baisemeaux hurried towards him. "Do not stand on ceremony, my dear captain," he said. "I have the worst memory in the world. I no sooner leave off thinking of my pigeons in their pigeon house than I am no better than the rawest recruit." "At all events, you remember it now," said D'Artagnan boldly. Yes, replied the governor, hesitating. "I think I do remember. It was when you came to the palace to see me. You told me some story or other about your accounts with M. de Louvière and M. de Tremblay." "Oh, yes." "Perfectly. And about M. d'Herblay's kindness towards you." "Ah!" exclaimed Aramis, looking at the unhappy governor full in the face. "And yet you just now said you had no memory, Monsieur de Baisemeaux." Baisemeaux interrupted the Musketeer in the middle of his revelations. Yes, you're quite right. How could I have forgotten? I remember it now as well as possible. I beg you 1,000 pardons. But now, once for all, my dear M. d'Artagnan, be sure that at this present time, as at any other, whether invited or not, you are perfectly at home here, you and M. D'Herblay, your friend," he said, turning towards Aramis. "And this gentleman, too," he added, bowing to Athos. "Well, I thought it would be sure to turn out so," replied D'Artagnan, "and that is the reason I came. Having nothing to do this evening at the Palais Royal, I wished to judge for myself what your ordinary style of living was like. And as I was coming along, I met the Comte de la Fère." Athos bowed. The Comte, who had just left His Majesty, handed me an order which required immediate attention. We were close by here. I wished to call in, even if it were for no other object than that of shaking hands with you and of presenting the Comte to you, of whom you spoke so highly that evening at the palace when— Certainly, M. le Comte de la Fère. Precisely. And he will sup with you too, I suppose, whilst I, unfortunate dog that I am, must run off on a matter of duty. Oh, what happy beings you are, compared to myself," he added, sighing as loud as Porthos might have done. "And so you are going away, then?" said Aramis and Baisemeaux together, with the same expression of delighted surprise, the tone of which was immediately noticed by D'Artagnan. "I leave you in my place," he said, "a noble and excellent guest." And he touched Athos gently on the shoulder, who, astonished also, could not help exhibiting his surprise a little, which was noticed by Aramis only, for M. de Baisemeaux was not quite equal to three friends in point of intelligence. "Oh, we will wait for you," said Baisemeaux. No, that would be really disobliging me." "You will be sure to return, though," said Athos, with an expression of doubt. And with a renewed pressure of the hand, he seemed to warn the Comte of the necessity of keeping perfectly discreet and impenetrable. Baisemeaux led D'Artagnan to the gate. Aramis, with many friendly protestations of delight, sat down by Athos, determined to make him speak. But Athos possessed every virtue and quality to the very highest degree, if necessity had required it. He would have been the finest orator in the world, but on other occasions he would rather have died than have opened his lips. 10 minutes after D'Artagnan's departure, the three gentlemen sat down at table, which was covered with the most substantial display of gastronomic luxury. Large joints, exquisite dishes, preserves, the greatest variety of wines, appeared successively upon the table, which was served at the king's expense, and at which expense M., Colbert found no difficulty in saving two-thirds, without anyone in the Bastille being the worse for it. Bazemose was the only one who ate and drank with gastronomic resolution. Aramis allowed nothing to pass by him, but merely touched everything he took. Athos, after the soup and 3 hors d'oeuvres, ate nothing more. The style of conversation was such as might have been anticipated between 3 men so opposite in temper and ideas. Aramis was incessantly asking himself by what extraordinary chance Athos was there at Bazemose's when D'Artagnan was no longer there, and why D'Artagnan did not remain when Athos was there. Athos sounded all the depths of the mind of Aramis, who lived in the midst of subterfuge, evasion, and intrigue. He studied his man well and thoroughly, and felt convinced that he was engaged upon some important project. And then he too began to think of his own personal affair, and to lose himself in conjectures as to D'Artagnan's reason for having left the Bastille so abruptly, and for leaving behind him a prisoner so badly introduced and so badly looked after by the prison authorities. But we shall not pause to examine into the thoughts and feelings of these personages, but will leave them to themselves, surrounded by the remains of poultry, game, and fish, which Bazemose's generous knife and fork had so mutilated. We are going to follow D'Artagnan instead, who, getting into the carriage which had brought him, said to the coachman, "Return to the palace as fast as the horses can gallop." "But," said the king to the courtier, when the latter had finished his report, "what did she decide to do? Shall I at least see her presently before supper? Will she come to me, or shall I be obliged to go to her room? I believe, sire, that if your majesty wishes to see her, you will not only have to take the first step in advance, but will have to go the whole way." The king smiled feebly. He knew how true the illustration was, for Athos had just left him. Saint Aignan thought to have made the king laugh. But on the contrary, from a mere smile Louis passed to the greatest seriousness of manner. He already began to experience that remorse which the Comte had promised D'Artagnan he would inflict upon him. He reflected that, in fact, these young persons had loved and sworn fidelity to each other, that one of the two had kept his word, and that the other was too conscientious not to feel her perjury most bitterly. And his remorse was not unaccompanied, for bitter pangs of jealousy began to beset the king's heart. He did not say another word, and instead of going to pay a visit to his mother or the queen or madam, in order to amuse himself a little and make the ladies laugh, as he himself used to say, he threw himself into the huge armchair in which his august father, Louis XIII, had passed so many weary days and years in company with Baradat and Cinq-Mars. Saint Aignan perceived the king was not to be amused at that moment. He tried a last resource, and pronounced Louise's name, which made the king look up immediately. "What does your majesty intend to do this evening? Shall Mademoiselle de la Vallière be informed of your intention to see her?" "It seems she is already aware of that," replied the king. No. Saint Aignan," he continued, after a moment's pause, "we will both of us pass our time in thinking and musing and dreaming. When Mademoiselle de la Vallière shall have sufficiently regretted what she now regrets, she will deign, perhaps, to give us some news of herself. Ah, sire, is it possible you can so misunderstand her heart, which is so full of devotion?" D'Artagnan looked at Saint Aignan. The king's eyes took the same direction as those of his captain. These looks would have been clear to anyone, and for a still greater reason, they were so for Saint Aignan. The courtier bowed and quitted the room, leaving the king and D'Artagnan alone. "Yes, sire," replied the captain of the Musketeers in a grave voice, "it is done." The king was unable to say another word. Pride, however, obliged him not to pause at what he had done. Whenever a sovereign has adopted a decisive course, even though it be unjust, he is compelled to prove to all witnesses, and particularly to prove it to himself, that he was quite right all through. A good means for effecting that, an almost infallible means, indeed, is to try and prove his victim to be in the wrong. Louis, brought up by Mazarin and of Austria, knew better than anyone else his vocation as a monarch. He therefore endeavored to prove it on the present occasion. After a few moments' pause, which he had employed in making silently to himself the same reflections which we had just expressed aloud, he said, in an indifferent tone, "What did the Comte say?" "Nothing at all, sire." "Surely he did not allow himself to be arrested without saying something?" "He said he expected to be arrested, sire." The king raised his head haughtily. "I presume," he said, "that Vicomte de la Fère has not continued to play his obstinate and rebellious part. In the first place, sire, what do you wish to signify by rebellious?" quietly asked the musketeer. "A rebel, in the eyes of the king, is a man who not only allows himself to be shut up in the Bastille, but still more, who opposes those who do not wish to take him there." "Who do not wish to take him there?" exclaimed the king. "What do you say, Captain? Are you mad?" "I believe not, sire." "I should say those whom your majesty entrusted with that duty. But it was you whom I entrusted with it," exclaimed the king. "Yes, sire, it was I. And yet you say that, despite my orders, you had the intention of not arresting the man who had insulted me." "Yes, sire, that was really my intention. I even proposed to the Comte to mount a horse that I had prepared for him at the Barrière de la Conference. And what was your object in getting this horse ready?" "You betrayed me, then, monsieur," cried the king, kindling with a wild pride. "Exactly so." There was nothing to say in answer to statements made in such a tone. The king was astounded at such an obstinate and open resistance on the part of D'Artagnan. "At least you had a reason, Monsieur d'Artagnan, for acting as you did?" said the king, proudly. "I have always a reason for everything, sire." "Me, sire? Did I not give you the choice to arrest, or not to arrest M. le Comte de la Fère?" "Yes, sire, but—" "But what?" exclaimed the king impatiently. "But you warned me, sire, that if I did not arrest him, your captain of the guard should do so. Was I not considerate enough towards you, from the very moment I did not compel you to obey me? To me, sire, you were, but not to my friend, for my friend would be arrested all the same, whether by myself or by the captain of the guards." "Well, then, you are a frondeur, and since there is no longer any Fronde, sire, in that case. But if what you say is true, what I say is always true, sire. What have you come to say to me, monsieur?" "That is true, sire, but at all events he is there, and since he is there, it is important that your majesty should know it." "Ah, Monsieur d'Artagnan, so you set your king at defiance." "Sire, Monsieur d'Artagnan, I warn you that you are abusing my patience." "On the contrary, sire." "What do you mean by on the contrary?" "I have come to get myself arrested, too." "Of course. My friend will get wearied to death in Bastille by himself, and I have come to propose to your majesty to permit me to bear him company. If your majesty will but give me the word, I will arrest myself. I shall not need the captain of the guard for that. I assure you." The king darted towards the table and seized hold of the pen to write the order for D'Artagnan's imprisonment. "Pay attention, monsieur, that this is forever," cried the king, in tones of sternest menace. "I can quite believe that," returned the musketeer. "For when you have once done such an act as that, you will never be able to look me in the face again." The king dashed down his pen violently. "Leave the room, monsieur," he said. "Not so, if it please your majesty." "What is that you say?" "Sire, I came to speak gently and temperately to your majesty. Your majesty got into a passion with me. That is a misfortune, but I shall not the less on that account say what I had to say to you." "Very well, monsieur, do it at once." "No, sire, for there is no question of my resignation at the present moment. Your majesty took up your pen just now to send me to the Bastille. Why should you change your intention?" "What do you mean by unfortunately?" "If it were you, you would approve of M. d'Artagnan's rebellious conduct, I suppose?" "Certainly." "And I should tell my captain of the Musketeers," continued D'Artagnan. "I should tell him, looking at him all the while with human eyes, and not with eyes like coals of fire, 'M. d'Artagnan, I have forgotten that I was the king, for I descended from my throne in order to insult a gentleman.'" The king threw himself back in his chair, cold as death and as livid as a corpse. Had a thunderbolt fallen at his feet, he could not have been more astonished. He seemed as if his respiration had utterly ceased, and that he was at the point of death. The honest voice of sincerity, as D'Artagnan had called it, had pierced through his heart like a sword blade. Stained with disgrace as this sword now is, it has henceforth no other sheath than either your heart or my own. I choose my own, sire, and you have to thank heaven and my own patience that I do so." Then snatching up his sword, he cried, "My blood be upon your head!" And, with a rapid gesture, he placed the hilt upon the floor and directed the point of the blade towards his breast. The king, however, with a movement far more rapid than that of D'Artagnan, threw his right arm around the Musketeer's neck, and with his left hand seized hold of the blade by the middle and returned it silently to the scabbard. D'Artagnan, upright, pale, and still trembling, let the king do all to the very end. An order for M. D'Artagnan to set the Comte de la Fère at liberty immediately. D'Artagnan seized the king's hand and imprinted a kiss upon it. He then folded the order, placed it in his belt, and quitted the room. Neither the king nor the captain had uttered a syllable. "O human heart, thou guide and director of kings," murmured Louis when alone, "when shall I learn to read in your inmost recesses, as in the leaves of a book? Oh, I am not a bad king, nor am I a poor king. I am but still a child when all is said and done." Chapter 65. Political Rivals. D'Artagnan had promised M. de Bazemose to return in time for dessert, and he kept his word. They had just reached a finer and more delicate class of wines and liqueurs with which the governor's cellar had the reputation of being most admirably stocked, when the silver spurs of the captain resounded in the corridor, and he himself appeared at the threshold. Athos and Aramis had played a close game. Neither of the two had been able to gain the slightest advantage over the other. But, although Aramis had remarked his emotion, he had not been able to guess the cause of it. Athos alone believed he had detected it. For him, D'Artagnan's return, and particularly the manner in which he, usually so impassible, seemed overcome, signified, "I have just asked the king something which the king has refused me." Thoroughly convinced that his conjecture was correct, Athos smiled, rose from the table, and made a sign to D'Artagnan, as if to remind him that they had something else to do than to sup together. D'Artagnan immediately understood him, and replied by another sign. Aramis and Bazemose watched this silent dialogue, and looked inquiringly at each other. Athos felt that he was called upon to give an explanation of what was passing. "The truth is, my friend," said the Comte de la Fère with a smile, "that you, Aramis, have been supping with a state criminal, and you, Monsieur de Bazemose, with your prisoner." Bazemose uttered an exclamation of surprise and almost of delight, for he was exceedingly proud and vain of his fortress, and for his own individual profit. The more prisoners he had, the happier he was, and the higher in rank the prisoners happened to be, the prouder he felt. Aramis assumed the expression of countenance he thought the position justified, and said, "Well, dear Athos, forgive me, but I almost suspected what has happened. Some prank of Raoul and La Vallière, I suppose?" "Alas!" said Bazemose. "And," continued Aramis, "you, a high and powerful nobleman as you are, forgetful that courtiers now exist, you have been to the king, I suppose, and told him what you thought his conduct." "Yes, you have guessed right." "So that," said Bazemose, trembling at having supped so familiarly with a man who had fallen into disgrace with the king, "so that, Monsieur le Comte—" "So that, my dear governor," said Athos, "my friend D'Artagnan will communicate to you the content of the paper which I perceived just peeping out his belt, and which assuredly can be nothing else than the order for my incarceration." "You will have a patient prisoner, monsieur," said Athos in his calm, soft voice. "A prisoner, too, who will not remain a month with you, my dear governor," said Aramis, while Bazemose, still holding the order in his hand, transcribed upon the prison registry. "Ah," said Aramis, "it is a labor that you deprived me of, D'Artagnan," and he pressed the Musketeer's hand in a significant manner at the same moment as that of Athos. "What?" said the latter in astonishment. "The king sets me at liberty." "Read, my dear friend," returned D'Artagnan. Athos took the order and read it. "It is quite true," he said. "Are you sorry for it?" asked D'Artagnan. "Oh, no, on the contrary. I wish the king no harm, and the greatest evil or misfortune that any one can wish kings is that they should commit an act of injustice. But you have had a difficult and painful task, I know." "Tell me," Have you not, D'Artagnan?" "I? Not at all," said the Musketeer, laughing. "The king does everything I wish him to do." Aramis looked fixedly at D'Artagnan, and saw that he was not speaking the truth. But Baisemeaux had eyes for nothing but D'Artagnan. So great was his admiration for a man who seemed to make the king do all he wished. "No, not precisely. The king did not explain himself upon that subject," replied D'Artagnan. "But I think the Comte could not well do better unless, indeed, he wishes particularly to thank the king." "No, indeed," replied Athos, smiling. "Well, then, I think," resumed D'Artagnan, "that the Comte cannot do better than to retire to his own chateau. However, my dear Athos, you have only to speak, to tell me what you want. If any particular place of residence is more agreeable to you than another, I am influential enough, perhaps, to obtain it for you." "Yes, Monsieur le Comte, I think so, at least I hope so," said the governor, turning over and over the two papers in question, "unless, however, D'Artagnan has a third order to give me." "Ah, Monsieur le Comte," said Baisemeaux, addressing Athos, "you do not know what you are losing. I should have placed you among the 30-franc prisoners, like the generals. What am I saying? I mean among the 50 francs, like the princes, and you would have supped every evening as you have done tonight." "And you, my dear Aramis," said Athos, smiling, "will you accompany me? La Fère is on the road to Vannes." "In that case," said Athos, "I must say adieu and take my leave of you. My dear Monsieur de Baisemeaux, I have to thank you exceedingly for your kind and friendly disposition toward me, and particularly for the enjoyable specimen you have given me of the ordinary fare of the Bastille." And, having embraced Aramis and shaken hands with M. de Baisemeaux, and having received best wishes for a pleasant journey from them both, Athos set off with D'Artagnan. Whilst the denouement of the scene of the Palais Royal was taking place at the Bastille, let us relate what was going on at the lodgings of Athos and Bragelonne. Grimaud, as we have seen, had accompanied his master to Paris, and, as we have said, he was present when Athos went out. He had observed D'Artagnan gnaw the corners of his mustache. He had seen his master get into the carriage. He had narrowly examined both their countenances, and he had known them both for a sufficiently long period to read and understand, through the mask of their impassibility, that something serious was the matter. As soon as Athos had gone, he began to reflect. He then, and then only, remembered the strange manner in which Athos had taken leave of him, the embarrassment, imperceptible as it would have been to any but himself, of the master whose ideas were, to him, so clear and defined, and the expression of whose wishes was so precise. He knew that Athos had taken nothing with him but the clothes he had on him at the time, and yet he seemed to fancy that Athos had not left for an hour merely, or even for a day. A long absence was signified by the manner in which he pronounced the word adieu. All these circumstances recurred to his mind, with feelings of deep affection for Athos, with that horror of isolation and solitude which invariably besets the minds of those who love, and all these combined rendered poor Grimaud very melancholy, and particularly uneasy. Without being able to account to himself for what he did since his master's departure, he wandered about the room, seeking, as it were, for some traces of him, like a faithful dog, who is not exactly uneasy about his absent master, but at least is restless. The first step he took was to search in his master's coat for D'Artagnan's letter. He found the letter still there, and its contents were found to run as follows. "My dear friend, Raoul has been to ask me for some particulars about the conduct of Mademoiselle de la Vallière during our young friend's residence in London. I am a poor captain of Musketeers, and I am sickened to death every day by hearing all the scandal of the barracks and bedside conversations. If I had told Raoul all I believe, I know the poor fellow would have died of it, but I am in the king's service, and cannot relate all I hear about the king's affairs. If your heart tells you to do it, set off at once. The matter concerns you more than it does myself, and almost as much as Raoul." "Yes," he said, "that is the key of the whole enigma. The young girl has been playing her pranks. What people say about her, and the king is true, then our young master has been deceived. He ought to know it. Monsieur le Comte has been to see the king, and has told him a piece of his mind. and then the king sent M. D'Artagnan to arrange the affair. Ah, gracious goodness, continued Grimaud. Monsieur le Comte, I now remember, returned without his sword. This discovery made the perspiration break out all over poor Grimaud's face. He did not waste any more time in useless conjecture, but clapped his hat on his head and ran to Raoul's lodgings. Raoul, after Louise had left him, had mastered his grief, if not his affection, and, compelled to look forward on that perilous road over which madness and revulsion were hurrying him, he had seen, from the very first glance, his father exposed to the royal obstinacy, since Athos had himself been the first to oppose any resistance to the royal will. At this moment, from a very natural sequence of feeling, the unhappy young man remembered the mysterious signs which Athos had made, and the unexpected visit of D'Artagnan. The result of the conflict between a sovereign and a subject revealed itself to his terrified vision. As D'Artagnan was on duty, that is, a fixture at his post without the possibility of leaving it, it was certainly not likely that he had come pay Athos a visit merely for the pleasure of seeing him. He must have come to say something to him. This something in the midst of such painful conjectures must have been the news of either a misfortune or a danger. Raoul trembled at having been so selfish as to have forgotten his father for his affection, at having, in a word, passed his time in idle dreams, or in an indulgence of despair, at a time when necessity existed for repelling such an imminent attack on Athos. The very idea nearly drove him frantic. He buckled on his sword and ran towards his father's lodgings. On his way there he encountered Grimaud, who, having set off in the opposite pole, was running with equal eagerness in search of the truth. The two men embraced each other most warmly. "Grimaud," exclaimed Raoul, "is the Comte well? Have you seen him?" "No, where is he?" "I am trying to find out." "Went out with him." "When?" 10 minutes after you did." "In what way did they go out?" "In a carriage." "Where did they go?" "I have no idea at all." "Did my father take any money with him?" "No." "Or his sword?" "No." "I have an idea, Grimaud, that M. D'Artagnan came in order to arrest Monsieur le Comte. Do you not think, monsieur?" "Yes, Grimaud. I could have sworn it." "What road did they take?" "The way leading toward the quay." "To the Bastille, then?" "Yes, yes." "Quick, quick, let us run." "Yes, let us not lose a moment." "But where are we to go?" said Raoul, overwhelmed. "We will go to M. D'Artagnan's first. We may perhaps learn something there." "No, if they keep me in ignorance of my father's, they will do the same everywhere. Let us go to... Oh, good heavens! Why, I must be mad today, Grimaud. I have forgotten M. du Vallon, who is waiting for and expecting me still." "Where is he, then?" "At the Minims of Vincennes." "Thank goodness! That is on the same side as the Bastille. I will run and saddle the horses, and we will go at once," said Grimaud. "Do, my friend, do." Chapter 66, in which Porthos is convinced without having understood anything. The good and worthy Porthos, faithful to all the laws of ancient chivalry, had determined to wait for him, de Saint-Aignan, until sunset, and as Saint-Aignan did not come, as Raoul had forgotten to communicate with his second, and as he found that waiting so long was very wearisome, Porthos had desired one of the gatekeepers to fetch him a few bottles of good wine and a good joint of meat, so that at least he might pass away the time by means of a glass or two and a mouthful of something to eat. He had just finished when Raoul arrived, escorted by Grimaud, both of them riding at full speed. As soon as Porthos saw the two cavaliers riding at such a pace along the road, he did not for a moment doubt but that they were the men he was expecting, and he rose from the grass upon which he had been indolently reclining, and began to stretch his legs and arms, saying, "See what it is to have good habits. The fellow has finished by coming, after all. If I had gone away, he would have found no one here, and would have taken advantage of that." He then threw himself into a martial attitude, and drew himself up to the full height of his gigantic stature. But instead of Saint-Aignan, he only saw Raoul, who, with the most despairing gestures, accosted him by crying out, "Pray forgive me, my dear friend, I am most wretched." "Raoul!" cried Porthos, surprised. "You have been angry with me?" said Raoul, embracing Porthos. "I? What for?" for having forgotten you. But I assure you my head seems utterly lost. If you only knew, you have killed him? Who? Saint Aignan. Or, if that is not the case, what is the matter? The matter is that Monsieur le Comte de la Fère has by this time been arrested. Porthos gave a start that would have thrown down a wall. Arrested, he cried out. By whom? By D'Artagnan. It is impossible, said Porthos. My dear friend, it is perfectly true. Porthos turned towards Grimaud, as if he needed a second confirmation of the intelligence. Grimaud nodded his head. And where have they taken him? Probably to the Bastille. What makes you think that? As we came along, we questioned some persons who saw the carriage pass, and others who saw it enter the Bastille. Oh, muttered Porthos. What do you intend to do? Inquired Raoul. Nothing. Only I will not have Athos remain at the Bastille. Do you know, said Raoul, advancing nearer to Porthos, that the arrest was made by order of the king? Porthos looked at the young man, as if to say, What does that matter to me? This dumb language seemed so eloquent of meaning to Raoul that he did not ask any other question. He mounted his horse again, and Porthos, assisted by Grimaud, had already done the same. Let us arrange our plan of action, said Raoul. Yes, returned Porthos. That is the best thing we can do. Raoul sighed deeply, and then paused suddenly. What is the matter? Asked Porthos. Are you faint? No, only I feel how utterly helpless our position is. Can we three pretend to go and take the Bastille? Well, if D'Artagnan were only here, replied Porthos, I am not so very certain we would fail. Raoul could not resist a feeling of admiration at the sight of such perfect confidence, heroic in its simplicity. These were truly the celebrated men who, by 3 or 4, attacked armies and assaulted castles. Men who had terrified death itself, who had survived the wrecks of a tempestuous age, and still stood, stronger than the most robust of the young. Monsieur, said he to Porthos, you have just given me an idea. We absolutely must see M. D'Artagnan. Undoubtedly. He ought by this time to have returned home, after having taken my father to the Bastille. Let us go to his house. First inquire at the Bastille, said Grimaud, who was in the habit of speaking little. But that to the purpose. Accordingly, they hastened towards the fortress, when one of those chances which heaven bestows on men as strong will cause Grimaud suddenly to perceive the carriage, which was entering by the great gate of the drawbridge. This was the moment that D'Artagnan was, as we have seen, returning from his visit to the king. In vain was it that Raoul urged on his horse in order to join the carriage and to see whom it contained. The horses had already gained the other side of the great gate, which again closed, while one of the sentries struck the nose of Raoul's horse with his musket. Raoul turned about, only too happy to find he had ascertained something respecting the carriage which had contained his father. We have him, said Grimaud. If we wait a little, it is certain he will leave. Don't you think so, my friend? Unless, indeed, D'Artagnan also be a prisoner, replied Porthos, in which case everything is lost. Raoul returned no answer, for any hypothesis was admissible. He instructed Grimaud to lead the horses to the little street Jean Beausire, so as to give rise to less suspicion, and himself with his piercing gaze watched for the exit either D'Artagnan or the carriage. Nor had he decided wrongly, for 20 minutes had not elapsed before the gate reopened and the carriage reappeared. A dazzling of the eyes prevented Raoul from distinguishing what figures occupied the interior. Grimaud averred that he had seen 2 persons, and that one of them was his master. Porthos kept looking at Raoul and Grimaud by turns, in the hope of understanding their idea. It is clear, said Grimaud, that if the Comte is in the carriage, either he is set at liberty or they are taking him to another prison. We shall soon see that by the road he takes, answered Porthos. If he is set at liberty, said Grimaud, they will conduct him home. True, rejoined Porthos. The carriage does not take that way, cried Raoul, and indeed the horses were just disappearing down the Faubourg Saint-Antoine. Let us hasten, said Porthos. We will attack the carriage on the road and tell Athos to flee. Rebellion, murmured Raoul. Porthos darted a second glance at Raoul, quite worthy of the first. Raoul replied only by spurring the flanks of his steed. In a few moments, the three cavaliers had overtaken the carriage, and followed it so closely that their horse's breath moistened the back of it. D'Artagnan, whose senses were ever on the alert, heard the trot of the horses at the moment when Raoul was telling Porthos to pass the chariot, so as to see who was the person accompanying Athos. Porthos complied, but could not see anything, for the blinds were lowered. Rage and impatience were gaining mastery over Raoul. He had just noticed a mystery preserved by Athos's companion, and determined on proceeding to extremities. On his part, D'Artagnan had perfectly recognized Porthos, and Raoul also, from under blinds, and had communicated to the Comte the result of his observation. They were desirous only of seeing whether Raoul and Porthos would push the affair to the uttermost. And this they speedily did, for Raoul, presenting his pistol, threw himself on the leader, commanding the coachman to stop. Porthos seized the coachman and dragged him from his seat. Grimaud already had hold of the carriage door. Raoul threw open his arms, exclaiming, Le Comte! Le Comte! Ah, is it you, Raoul? Said Athos, intoxicated with joy. Not bad, indeed, added D'Artagnan, with a burst of laughter, and they both embraced the young man and Porthos, who had taken possession of them. My brave Porthos! Best of friends, cried Athos. It is still the same old way with you. He is still only 20, said D'Artagnan. Brave Porthos. Confound it, answered Porthos, slightly confused. We thought that you were being arrested. While, rejoined Athos, the matter in question was nothing but my taking a drive in D'Artagnan's carriage. But we followed you from the Bastille, returned Raoul, with a tone of suspicion and reproach, where we had been to take supper with our friend Baisemeaux. Do you recollect Baisemeaux, Porthos? Very well, indeed. And there we saw Aramis. In the Bastille? At supper? Ah, said Porthos, again breathing freely. He gave us 1,000 messages to you. And where's Le Comte going? Asked Grimaud, already recompensed by a smile from his master. We were going home to Blois. How can that be? At once, said Raoul. Yes, right forward. Without any luggage? Oh, Raoul would have been instructed to forward me mine, or to bring it with him on his return, if he returns. If nothing detains him longer in Paris, said D'Artagnan, with a glance firm and cutting as steel, and as painful, for reopen the poor young fellow's wounds, he will do well to follow you, Athos. There is nothing to keep me any longer in Paris, said Raoul. Then we will go immediately. And D'Artagnan? Oh, as for me, I was only accompanying Athos as far as the barrier, and I returned with Porthos. Very good, said the latter. Come, my son, added the Comte, gently passing his arm around Raoul's neck to draw him into the carriage, and again embracing him. Grimaud, continued the Comte, you will return quietly to Paris with your horse and du Valens, for Raoul and I will mount here and give up the carriage to these two gentlemen to return to Paris in, and then, as soon as you arrive, you will take my clothes and letters and forward the whole to me at home. But, observed Raoul, who was anxious to make the Comte converse, when you return to Paris, there will not be a single thing there for you, which will be very inconvenient. I think it will be a very long time, Raoul, ere I return to Paris. The last sojourn we have made there has not been of a nature to encourage me to repeat it. Raoul hung down his head and said not a word more. Athos descended from the carriage and mounted the horse which had brought Porthos, and which seemed no little pleased at the exchange. Then they embraced and clasped each other's hands, and interchanged 1,000 pledges of eternal friendship. Porthos promised to spend a month with Athos at the first opportunity. D'Artagnan engaged to take advantage of his first leave of absence, and then, having embraced Raoul for the last time, "To you, my boy," said he, "I will write." Coming from D'Artagnan, who he knew wrote very seldom, these words expressed everything. Raoul was moved even to tears. He tore himself away from the Musketeer and departed. D'Artagnan rejoined Porthos in the carriage. "Well," said he, "my dear friend, what a day we have had." "Indeed we have," answered Porthos. "You must be quite worn out." "Not quite. However, I shall retire early to rest. so as to be ready for tomorrow. And wherefore? Why, to complete what I begun. You make me shudder, my friend. You seem to me quite angry. What the devil have you begun which is not finished? Listen, Raoul has not fought, but I must fight. With whom? With the king? How? Exclaimed Porthos, astounded. With the king? Yes, I say, you great baby, with the king. I assure you it is with Saint Aignan. Look now, this is what I mean. You draw your sword against the king in fighting with this gentleman. Ah, said Porthos, staring. Are you sure of it? Indeed I am. What in the world are we to do, then? We must try and make a good supper. Porthos, the captain of the Musketeers, keeps a tolerable table. There you will see the handsome Saint Aignan, and will drink his health. Aye, cried Porthos, horrified. What? Said D'Artagnan. You refuse to drink the king's health? But, body alive, I am not talking to you about the king at all. I am speaking of de Saint Aignan. But when I repeat that it is the same thing... Ah, well, well, said Porthos, overcome. You understand, don't you? No, answered Porthos, but 'tis all the same. Chapter 67. De Baisemeaux's society. The reader has not forgotten that, on quitting the Bastille, D'Artagnan and the Comte de la Fère had left Aramis in close confabulation with Baisemeaux. When once these two guests had departed, Baisemeaux did not in the least perceive that the conversation suffered by their absence. He used to think that wine after supper, and that of the Bastille in particular, was excellent, and that it was a stimulation quite sufficient to make any honest man talkative. But he little knew his greatness, who was never more impenetrable than at dessert. His greatness, however, perfectly understood de Baisemeaux, when he reckoned on making the governor discourse by the means which the latter regarded as efficacious. The conversation, therefore, without flagging in appearance, flagged in reality, for Baisemeaux not only had it nearly all to himself, but further, kept speaking only of that singular event, the incarceration of Athos, followed by so prompt an order to set him again at liberty. Nor, moreover, had Baisemeaux failed to observe that the two orders of arrest and of liberation were both in the king's hand. But then, the king would not take the trouble to write similar orders except under pressing circumstances. All this was very interesting and, above all, very puzzling to Baisemeaux. But as, on the other hand, all this was very clear to Aramis, the latter did not attach to the occurrence the same importance as did the worthy governor. Besides, Aramis rarely put himself out of the way for anything, and he had not yet told de Baisemeaux for what reason he had now done so. And so at the very climax of Baisemeaux's dissertation, Aramis suddenly interrupted him. Tell me, my dear Baisemeaux, said he, have you never had any other diversions at the Bastille than those at which I assisted during the 2 or 3 visits I have had the honor to pay you? This address was so unexpected that the governor, like a vein which suddenly receives an impulsion opposed without a wind, was quite dumbfounded at it. Diversions, said he, but I take them continually, monseigneur. Oh, to be sure. And these diversions are of every kind. Visits, no doubt? No, not visits. Visits are not frequent at the Bastille. What, are visits rare, then? Very much so. Even on the part of your society? What do you term my society, the prisoners? Oh, no, your prisoners, indeed. I know well it is you who visit them, and not they you. By your society, I mean, my dear Baisemeaux, the society of which you are a member. Baisemeaux looked fixedly at Aramis, and then, as if the idea which had flashed across his mind were impossible, oh, he said, I have very little society at present. If I must own it to you, dear d'Herblay, the fact is, to stay at the Bastille appears, for the most part, distressing and distasteful to persons of the gay world. As for the ladies, it is never without a certain dread, which costs me infinite trouble to allay, that they succeed in reaching my quarters. And, indeed, how should they avoid trembling a little, poor things, when they see those gloomy dungeons, and reflect that they are inhabited by prisoners who, and in proportion as the eyes of Baisemeaux concentrated their gaze on the face of Aramis, the worthy governor's tongue faltered more and more until it ended by stopping altogether. No, you don't understand me, my dear Baisemeaux. You don't understand me. I do not at all mean to speak of society in general, but a particular society of the society, in a word, to which you are affiliated. Baisemeaux nearly dropped a glass of muscat, which he was in the act of raising to his lips. Affiliated, cried he, affiliated. Yes, affiliated, undoubtedly, repeated Aramis, with the greatest self-possession. Are you not a member of a secret society, my dear M. Baisemeaux? Secret or mysterious. Oh, M. D'Herblay, consider now, don't deny it. But believe me, I believe what I know. I swear to you. Listen to me, my dear M. Baisemeaux. I say yes, you say no. One of us two necessarily says what is true, and the other, it inevitably follows what is false. Well, and then, well, we shall come to an understanding presently. Let us see, said Baisemeaux, let us see. Now drink your glass of muscat. Dear Monsieur de Baisemeaux, said Aramis. What the devil? You look quite scared. No, not the least in the world. Oh, no. Drink then. Baisemeaux drank, but he swallowed the wrong way. Well, resumed Aramis, if, I say, you're not a member of a secret or mysterious society, which you like to call it, the epithet is of no consequence. If, I say, you're not a member of society similar to that I wish to designate, well then, you will not understand a word of what I'm going to say. That is all. Oh, be sure beforehand that I shall not understand anything. Well, try, now let us see. That is what I am going to do. If, on the contrary, you are one of the members of the society, you will immediately answer me, yes or no. Begin your questions, continued Baisemeaux, trembling. You will agree, dear Monsieur de Baisemeaux, continued Aramis, with the same impassibility, that it is evident a man cannot be a member of society. It is evident that he cannot enjoy the advantages it offers to the affiliated, without being himself bound to certain little services. In short, stammered Baisemeaux, that would be intelligible if, well, resumed Aramis, there is in society of which I speak, and of which, as it seems you are not a member. Allow me, said Baisemeaux. I should not like to say absolutely. There is an engagement entered into by all the governors and captains of fortresses affiliated to the order. Baisemeaux grew pale. Now the engagement, continued Aramis firmly, is of this nature. Baisemeaux rose, manifesting unspeakable emotion. Go on, dear Blay, go on, said he. Aramis then spoke, or rather recited the following paragraph, in the same tone as if he had been reading it from a book. The aforesaid captain or governor of a fortress shall allow to enter, when need shall arise, and on demand of the prisoner, a confessor affiliated to the order. He stopped. Baisemeaux was quite distressing to look at, being so wretchedly pale and trembling. Is not that the text of the agreement? Quietly asked Aramis. Monseigneur, began Baisemeaux. Ah, well, you begin to understand, I think. Monseigneur, cried Baisemeaux, do not trifle so with my unhappy mind. I find myself as nothing in your hands, if you have the malignant desire to draw from me the little secrets of my administration. Oh, by no means. Pray undeceive yourself, dear M. Baisemeaux. It is not the little secrets of your administration, but those of your conscience that I aim at. Well, then my conscience be it, dear M. D'Herblay, but have some consideration for the situation I am in, which is no ordinary one. It is no ordinary one, my dear monsieur, continued the inflexible Aramis, if you are a member of the society, but it is a quite natural one if free from all engagement. You are answerable only to the king. Well, monsieur, well, I obey only the king, and whom else would you have a French nobleman obey? Aramis did not yield an inch, but with that silvery voice of his continued, It is very pleasant, said he, for a French nobleman, for a prelate of France, to hear a man of your mark express himself so loyally, dear to Baisemeaux, and having heard you to believe no more than you do. Have you doubted, monsieur? Oh, no. And so you doubt no longer? I have no longer any doubt that such a man as you, monsieur, said Aramis gravely, does not faithfully serve the masters whom he voluntarily chose for himself. Masters, cried Baisemeaux. Yes, masters, I said. Monsieur d'Herblay, you are still jesting, are you not? Oh, yes. I understand that it is a more difficult position to have several masters in one. But the embarrassment is owing to you, my dear Baisemeaux, and I am not the cause of it. Certainly not, returned the unfortunate governor, more embarrassed than ever. But what are you doing? You are leaving the table? Assuredly. Are you going? Yes, I am going. But you are behaving very strangely towards me, Monseigneur. I am behaving strangely. How you make that out? Have you sworn, then, to put me to the torture? No, I should be sorry to do so. Remain, then. I cannot. And why? Because I have no longer anything to do here, and indeed, I have duties to fulfill elsewhere. Duties so late as this? Yes. Understand me now, my dear de Baisemeaux. They told me at the place whence I came. The aforesaid governor or captain will allow to enter, as need shall rise, on the prisoner's demand, a confessor affiliated with the order. I came. You do not know what I mean, and so I shall return to tell them that they are mistaken and that they must send me elsewhere. What? You are, cried Baisemeaux, looking at Aramis almost in terror. The confessor affiliated to the order, said Aramis, without changing his voice. But, gentle as the words were, they had the same effect on the unhappy governor as a clap of thunder. Baisemeaux became livid, and it seemed to him as if Aramis's beaming eyes were two forks of flame, piercing to the very bottom of his soul. The confessor, murmured he. You, Monseigneur, the confessor of the order? Yes, I. But we have nothing to unravel together, seeing that you are not one of the affiliated. Monseigneur. And I understand that, not being so, you refuse to comply with his command. Monseigneur, I beseech you, condescend to hear me. And wherefore? Monseigneur, I do not say that I have nothing to do with the society. I say not that I refuse to obey. Nevertheless, am de Baisemeaux. What has passed wears very much the air of resistance. Oh, no. Monseigneur, no. I only wish to be certain. To be certain of what? Said Aramis, in a tone of supreme contempt. Of nothing at all, Monseigneur. Baisemeaux lowered his voice, and bending before the prelate, said, I am at all times and in all places at the disposal of my superiors, but... Very good. I like you better thus, monsieur, said Aramis, as he resumed his seat, and put out his glass to Baisemeaux, whose hand trembled so that he could not fill it. You were saying, but... continued Aramis. But, replied the unhappy man, having received no notice, I was very far from expecting it. Does not the gospel say, watch, for the moment is known only of God? Do not the rules of the order say, watch, for that which I will, you ought always to will also? And what pretext will serve you now that you did not expect a confessor, M. de Baisemeaux? Because, Monseigneur, there's at present in the Bastille no prisoner ill. Aramis shrugged his shoulders. What do you know about that? Said he. But, nevertheless, it appears to me. And de Baisemeaux, said Aramis, turning round in his chair, here is your servant, who wishes to speak with you. And at this moment, de Baisemeaux' servant appeared at the threshold of the door. What is it? Asked Baisemeaux sharply. Monsieur, said the man, they are bringing you the doctor's return. Aramis looked at de Baisemeaux with a calm and confident eye. Well, said he, let the messenger enter. The messenger entered, saluted, and handed in the report. Baisemeaux ran his eye over it, and raising his head, said in surprise, Number 12 is ill. How was it then, said Aramis, carelessly, that you told me everybody was well in your hotel, and de Baisemeaux? And he emptied his glass without removing his eyes from Baisemeaux. The governor then made a sign to the messenger, and when he quitted the room, said, still trembling, I think that there is an article on the prisoner's demand. Yes, it is so, answered Aramis. But see what it is they want with you now. And that moment a sergeant put his head in at the door. "What do you want now?" cried Baisemeaux. "Can you not leave me in peace for 10 minutes?" "Monsieur," said the sergeant, the sick man, number 12, "has commissioned the turnkey to request you to send him a confessor." Baisemeaux very nearly sank on the floor, but Aramis disdained to reassure him, just as he had disdained to terrify him. "What must I answer?" inquired Baisemeaux. "Just what you please," replied Aramis, compressing his lips. "That is your business. I am not the governor of the Bastille." "Tell the prisoner," cried Baisemeaux quickly. "Tell the prisoner that his request is granted." The sergeant left the room. "Oh, Monseigneur, Monseigneur," murmured Baisemeaux, "how could I have suspected? How could I have foreseen this?" "Who requested you to suspect, and who besought you to foresee?" contemptuously answered Aramis. "The order suspects, the order knows, the order foresees. Is that not enough?" "What is it you command?" added Baisemeaux. "I, nothing at all. I am nothing but a poor priest, a simple confessor. Have I your orders to go and see the sufferer?" "Oh, Monseigneur, I do not order. I pray you to go." "'Tis well. Conduct me to him." End of Louise de la Vallière. The last text in the series is The Man in the Iron Mask.